Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Girl from His Past, Nami's Green Eyes, by Weather Mango Hans SJ 4. A girl from Luffy's past shows up, and her appearance causes trouble for our favorite Straw Hat hero and his Navigator member list. Taz Peterson, Yonko, Leilani Morris, Warlord, Garrick Russell, Warlord, W Black Money _ Young Lion, Warlord, W KSG PL4YZ, Warlord, Adios.
Luffy thinks the crew of the Straw Hat Pirates loved their new ship. For starters, it was so much bigger than the Merry-Go, and with the solider docking system it was much flashier, faster too. Plus with their new Nakama Frankie, if the Sunny was damaged, which was unlikely, it would be fixed properly rather than with Usopp's zealous yet lacking craftsmanship. However, it was not perfect, or at least in the mind of Captain Monkey D. Luffy. There was one thing that he liked better on Mary, the figurehead. Even though the lion, yes the L is important, was great and gave the Sunny its name, and a lion was more befitting of a pirate ship than a ram. Luffy suffered dearly, for alas he no longer had his special seat at the front of the ship so that he would be the first to see anything, be it a new island, enemy vessel or cool looking wooden toys. Also he had to be in front so that he could protect his friends, they were his nakama. It was much too dangerous to sit there, it curved too much and was separated from the rest of the ship. The final reason Luffy didn't sit there way the wooden mane was much too pointy and rode up his pants in a very uncomfortable way. So Luffy was doing something that he rarely tried to do. He was thinking. He had to find the new lookout point that would not be so obviously a lookout point as the crow's nest. There were far too many dangers on the Grand Line. Not all dangers were physical threats, some were attacks on their fears. The fight with CP9 and the Buster Call threat that sparked it was one of the fear threats that waited for them. This brought a great deal of concern to their next destination, Merman Island. This was so complicated. As far as Luffy could remember, they only ran into 3 mere people so far on the Grand Line, so his Nami's past with the funny sea people race had not been much concern, but how would she handle being surrounded by so many of them? Could she even function? What if they ran into trouble? Luffy sniggered. Who was he kidding? Of course they'll get into trouble, that's half the fun of any adventure. Yes, Luffy now said, his Nami, it was okay since it was inside his head, so Sanji would not kick his ass for talking about Nami Swan in such a manner. Apart from his problems with protecting his crew and Sanji problems, there were also other concerns. One being what started the thought process on Nami's past. She had been thought of as someone's property for 10 years and he would not want to offend her. Her punches hurt sort of like grams. Of course there was another reason. The reason he actually never really seemed to have any romantic desires whatsoever, her. He had not thought of her in years. Then again he tried not to think much, and even less about her. She was the granddaughter of Gramps' best friend, and just like he was, she was raised to be a powerful asset to the Marines. She was weird, or at least around him people said she was. She was clingy, and if he ever showed even a hint of affection she would jump him and kiss his face all over. And although he would never admit it, she kind of scared him, and he wasn't scared of anything, except her. But when he was younger she was the only person that ever managed to sneak up on him, other than Ace and Gramps. "Oh oi, guys," Usopp shouted, snapping him out of the longest thinking session he had in years. 4 to be exact. "There's a ship at 6 o'clock. Zoro said as he turned around to look at the front of the ship. "I don't see anything," instantly dismissing it as another of the Usopp pranks he wanted back to lifting weights. They were big weights. He said 6 o'clock, Mosshead, Sanji said after taking a drag on his cigarette. Promptly a weight went flying towards Sanji, who calmly responded by breaking aforementioned weight. Scuffle ensues. Luffy took this opportunity to stretch up to the crow's nest. "Really, let me see," he shouted as he snatched Usopp's prized telescope from Usopp's grasping hands. "Not so smart now, Love Cook," announced Zoro to the world as he gained an advantage, and promptly lost it. Scuffle continues. Luffy finally got the ship in question into view after working out how to use the telescope. It's so small, and it was barely larger than Ace's little boat. 6 o'clock is that way Marimo, look, see, it's the W. Sanji's voice was cut off by its sudden encounter with the floor. Scuffle reaches climax, but Luffy, it's still a marine ship, and someone that could traverse the Grand Line in such a small ship must be dangerous, Usopp said, although Luffy wasn't hesitating. Luffy had a bad feeling about this ship, which was weird. Why would something so dinky upset him? Oh, someone's coming out, and the minute he laid his eye on the sole occupant of the dingy his hands clenched, breaking the telescope. Luffy, telecopy, new, 10,000 belly. Why world why? Usopp screamed through his shock and tears. Luffy barely heard Usopp's raving for justice. He was in a shock of his own. "Frankie, activate the PADALS, we need to get away as fast as possible," Luffy screamed with evident fear in his voice. The 7 remaining Straw Hat Pirates called out in unison. The words that their captain had said were so shocking that it even stopped Sanji's and Zoro's fight before Nami had to smash their skulls together. Scuffle ends. What? I'm the captain, do it, shush shush shush, they might catch us. They all just stood there still shell-shocked, they all still could not believe the words coming out of their captain's mouth. Luffy never ran away and that ship was not even the size of the Mini Mary. It just did not make sense and so they just stared at him. Oh, oi guys, maybe we should do what he says. Usopp finally spoke up, finally coming out of shock. I mean, Luffy sounds scared, it must be incredibly dangerous. But it was too late, the marine Dingy caught up with them and a bright light stopped them from making any move. Aw damn, Luffy thought as he felt arms wrap around his neck, lips connecting to his left cheek, and he plummeted from the crow's nest. When he landed on the deck he sighed and with a groan he said, "Hello Yuki, living contradiction." If you asked anyone who she was you would get a variety of answers. If the person was close to her they would simply tell you she was herself and that's all she will ever be. If you asked people that never met her they would say she was some marine captain. However, if you asked people who worked with her but kept their distance, they would tell you that everything about her was in contradiction to everything else about her. There were many reasons for this and as many examples. She dressed in form-fitting clothes but would then say other women in similar clothing were slutty. She referred to those who were her superiors in a disrespectful manner with the san, kun, and chan suffixes but always call her subordinate sama. She was one of the most intelligent people in the Marines, achieving the rank of captain, the same rank as Smoker, in only 1 year after officially joining the Marines, but also the ditziest. She also had problems with blondes because she thought they were all ditziest, all of them. But contradicting thing about her most of all, her name Kyuka Yuki, 1. There were many more examples to this but most of these are contributed or involve 1. For lack of a more accurate term, man, a boy she met and fell in love with when they were 10. Of course most people do not know their connection. Of course if you knew this, man, it would seem even stranger. This, man, was a pirate. What? That's right, this high-ranking marine woman is in love with a man who decided to sail the seas for loot. Even worse, this man had decided to become the pirate king when he was 8. Double what? Which is why she was currently out on the Grand Line by herself in her private marine dinghy heading from Water 7 to the Merman Island. She had tried to catch him there but barely missed him. She was still mad at Vice Admiral Garp for not letting her come with him, even if she already had her 3-month vacation in order. She heard Garp was going to Water 7 from the same person the Marines got the pictures for, that evil, so incredibly evil and evil orange-headed female. That same picture had been the cause for her to try and meet him, herself. She had known that he had finally started his pirate journey several months back when she saw his original bounty poster. She had also known that he had female members in his nakama from Captain Smoker's reports, but that did not cause her worry. However, as soon as she saw that evil picture and read the name that was underneath, too, she went into a panic. She instantly began her request for a small vacation, the only vacation she took of any length in her 3 years. She had originally intended to go with Garp but he shot her down immediately. She didn't even get a reason, and you don't attempt to get a reason from Garp unless he offers one. After her original plans fell through, she had to put in her request to take her personalized ship. It was much faster than most and could increase its speed if she activated Devil Fruit abilities. So it was not that surprising to her when she saw the unique Jolly Roger. She smiled to herself as she got out of her seat, readjusted her short one-piece dress to look good for their reunion, and put her white overcoat with the kanji for justice on the back, and went out to the deck. Shortly after she went out onto the deck, the sound of someone screaming, "Why world why?" through the person's obvious shock and tears. Huh? Yuki said to herself, clearly confused. Without context that statement made no sense to her. And then she heard a sound she had not heard in years. "Frankie, activate the PADALS, we need to get away as fast as possible," screamed a voice filled with evident fear. So happy to hear the voice of the boy she fell in love with, she completely forgot all about her manners and her boat. And with a squeal of kya, she activated her Devil Fruit ability and jumped to where she heard his voice and promptly wrapped her arms around him and kissed his scarred left cheek. This movement caused both of them to plummet to the deck. She never let go of him, however. She heard her love sigh and groan as he said, "Hello Yuki." "Hello to you too." She kissed his cheek again with a bit more force this time. Raba Luffy, 3. Kyuka Yuki is a woman of contradictions and problems. The biggest being she had fallen in love with Monkey D. Luffy. Request, aka give me a goddamn vacation right now or I'll have you cleaning the privies from the inside for the next 3 months. Request, bad day. Nami should have known that today would be a bad day. She should have known the minute she woke up. When you wake up from your favorite reacquiring dream in an incredible comfortable bed, your day has nowhere to go but down. Of course this too should have tipped her off. It always made everything harder waking up from that dream. The dream where it was just her captain, and very little of anything else. It caused her to be high-strung all day, and it made it too easy for her to blush. Nami did not like to blush. When she did, her whole face lit up. Of course she did not know this until recently. Before she met Luffy, she had never blushed before. She did not have time to be embarrassed. She did not have the time. She had a village to free. But then again, before she met Luffy, she had not been in love either. What, not another one? How lucky can one guy be? Of course she would not admit this to anyone and did not even admit it to herself until after Drum Island. He had saved Sanji-kun, and her again, and she finally admitted to herself that she could not live without this childish man. But of course she never let on that she couldn't. It would make everything more complicated, and a pirate's life was supposed to be carefree, or at least that was the impression that Luffy gave her. Needless to say that was just an excuse. Her real reason at the time was she did not know how Luffy would take a confession of this kind. He most likely misunderstand what she said, and she did not know if she could take that. She wasn't even sure if he even liked girls, but the uncertainty was squashed when she found all of her crew, but most importantly Luffy, peeking on her and Vivi. Hey, they still owe me money for that, Nami thought. But back to the matter at hand. Today was a bad day. There seemed that there was problems with the showers. They had no cold water, which this morning she desperately needed. The bad day continued at breakfast, where she realized that she forgot how to hold a glass, and the cause of her unwanted warm shower. It seemed that Luffy decided that it would be fun to wake the other male member of the crew with cold water, and Zoro refused to wake up, thus causing Luffy to continue until he ran out. This caused her to beat these two into the ground and then retreat from the room, in a huff, before anyone could ask her what that was all about. The day continued as such. When the paper bird arrived, they raised the price of the paper again, and she tried to haggle the price, unsuccessfully, down until lunch. However, after lunch seemed to be a turning point of the day, or so she thought. Everything seemed to be quiet, another bad sign. The only sounds on the ship that she could determine were that of Zoro lifting his weights and Sanji-kun cries of Nami Swan and Robin Schwan as he tried to win their affection. No matter how hopeless his attempts were concerning her, she didn't have it in her to tell him that it was never going to happen. No matter what he did, she wasn't that evil, even if he would bounce back as soon as something else in a skirt walked by. And she had to admit she enjoyed his semi-loyalty to her. In spite of the enjoyment she was having with the quiet, just sunbathing in a blue-green camo-style bikini top and a pair of tight-fitting short jean shorts while reading her paper. After a couple of hours of it, 3 to be accurate, she relished how fundamentally wrong it was for the area at any time to be quiet for any length of time. It just didn't make sense to her. Luffy and quiet went together about as much as her, and giving money away without charging interest. I should recalculate how much they owe me with something like that. It should be at least 200 interest, if not more. With a nagging sense that something was not right, she looked up from her paper to check on her captain. If something could keep Luffy quiet, it would be good to know for the future. But she was more than mildly shocked when all she saw was that he was just standing at the side of the ship as if he was looking for something. Which only added to her confusion. If he couldn't find something, he would have surely asked for someone to help him, and she contemplated asking him if he needed help but did not get the chance to as Usopp called out, "Oh oi, guys." And she knew that anything that followed would take Luffy's attention and he would completely forget about whatever it was he was looking for. So she turned back to her paper as she tried to continue to read her paper. However, she could not read another word as the quiet that had settled on the ship for the last 3 hours was shattered. Frankie and Chopper came out on the deck, in a rather noisy fashion, after Usopp yelled something about a ship. She wasn't paying attention, and if it was really important he would be screaming instead of his mild whimpering. And soon after that, Zoro and Sanji-kun broke out into another one of their fights that had caused most of the damage to Mary before. She was not in the mood for this today, however, so she put her paper down and walked over to them with every intention of smacking some sense into those over-testosteroned bakas. However, all thoughts were pushed outside her head as the most surprising thing of the day, so far, happened. "Frankie, activate the PADALS, we need to get away as fast as possible." Luffy screamed with more than a small amount of something she couldn't remember ever hearing in her captain's voice. She, along with everyone else, let out. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not only was Luffy running away, but he was doing it because he was scared. She tried to contemplate this, but this made even less sense than his earlier actions, or lack thereof. Come on, this has to be a joke of some kind. I mean, nothing scares Luffy, at least, as far as I know, but really how much do I know about him? Both Ace and Garp were a real surprise. Once more she couldn't continue her actions to completion. As bright flash and what could only be described as a girly squeal assaulted her senses of sight and hearing. After a few seconds the light stopped along with the screeching, and so she removed her hands from her ears and opened her eyes. However, what greeted her when she did made her strongly wish she hadn't. There on the deck just below the crow's nest was Luffy and some other women. With a groan, Luffy put his arms behind his back to try and get into a sitting position. This woman, who Nami already decided she didn't like, had a white overcoat covering her arms and shoulders, but reviled that she was wearing a one-piece red dress, styled very similarly to what Robin wore at Water 7. On her head she wore a white cap with the word marine across it and her hair tucked underneath it, which she noticed was a green with a slightly darker hue than Zoro's. She also wore a pair of, what looked like, a red combination of heavy boots and high heels. Of course, without saying the fact that this girl was part of the Marines, it should have been the reason for her dislike of the female. However, real reason for this dislike was this woman was currently straddling her captain's, or, as she was feeling at this moment, her, Luffy's, hips and kissing him even if it was only on the cheek. With a sigh, Luffy answered the one question that Nami would have actually paying money for. Who the fuck is this woman? When he said, "Hello Yuki?" This woman, who was now known as Yuki, at this point had removed her lips from Luffy's cheek but only to, "Hello to you too," and reattach her lips to Luffy's cheek with more force than before, but soon relished it and say, "Rabba Luffy." Oh great, Nami thought. This has got to be the worst day ever. I'm about to meet Luffy X, or God forbid, current lover, should have known. Luffy should have known better than to try and get away from her. It always made things worse when he tried to run from her. Luffy was not very happy rubber monkey in his current situation. He never was one to stay in one place for very long, unless he needed to, toilet, and hated being pinned down even more. But even though he technically had the physical strength to force Yuki off, he chose not to because through a long time of trial and error he knew that any attempt he made to move away from her or touch her would be interpreted by her as either a play of affection on his part or an open invitation for her to try something. So his only hope to get out from under her was that she would have to want to move, or what he figured would happen, considering his crewmates, she would have to be distracted from him long enough for him to scurry away. Thankfully Luffy knew his crew well and knew that he'd shortly be saved by a fellow crew member's ignorance. Luffy's savior finally came to the rescue. Sanji waltzed in and made his entrance by grabbing Yuki's hand. "Bienvenue." He kissed her hand. "Big mistake, mademoiselle," he said in most charming voice in his attempt to appear gallant. However, this action, although giving Luffy just what he wanted, resulted in Sanji getting the exact opposite reaction of what he wanted and expected. Yuki immediately stood up from her position on Luffy and he saw Nami sigh in relief at this action. Yuki took her hand away from Sanji, readjusted herself, and brought her red high-heeled steel-toed boot up with shocking speed and accuracy directly into Sanji's groin. For the freedom of Luffy, sacrifices had to be made. My balls," Sanji whispered with teary eyes, clutching his pride and joy while he rolled on the ground pathetically. "It hurt just looking at him," said Frankie and Chopper from the deck, and Usopp said from the crow's nest, "I don't recall giving you permission to touch me, let alone kiss me. Burondo, one." Heh, Zoro chuckled at Sanji's misfortune. "Great going, love cook." But Sanji didn't respond to the swordsman's insult. He was in way too much pain. Whether it was all physical was uncertain. "I mean, don't you have any sense? I would never let a baron." Ahem. Robin cleared her throat behind Nami to get Yuki's attention. "Sorry to interrupt your rant, Marine-san. But what are you doing here?" she said with her arms crossed in front of her chest, prepared for a fight if she didn't like her answer. "Oh, excuse me, Nico-sama," Yuki said with a bow. She began to turn around. "Would you care to introduce me to your—" She stopped and she noticed the lack of Luffy present with his outline blinking in the place where he was before. "Rabba Luffy, where'd you go?" she said with a pout. Yuki began to search for Luffy when she noticed a person in the crow's nest. "Excuse me, Sogeking-sama?" Usopp hid himself further into the crow's nest. "But did you see which way Rabba Luffy went?" Usopp shook his head vigorously in a direction, meaning, no. Unfortunately, his nose was mistaken for him pointing in a direction. "Well, thank you. Ah, there you are," she said as she spotted Luffy heading towards the back of the ship. Luffy was incredibly thankful to Sanji. Maybe when dinner came around he wouldn't steal his meat. Maybe, Sanji had proved an excellent distraction. He actually managed to crawl all the way to the door that would let him hide below deck. However, he should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Kya, ah damn, Luffy was again tackled to the ground. Now, Rabba Luffy," she rubbed her cheek against his, "you need to introduce me." "And why would I do that? It's the polite thing to do." She pressed her chest into his back. "Beside, if you don't I will, and you know what I'll say," she said as she blew into his ear. He sighed again. He seemed to be doing that a lot today. "Fine, but you have to behave." He knew almost word for word what she would say, and it was not something he wanted his nakama, and more specifically Nami, to hear. "Kya," she squealed again. "I knew you would do this for me." She helped him up and dragged him back to the area where below the crow's nest, where the rest of the crew were gathered underneath the crow's nest. Usopp was finally convinced to come down from the lookout. Nami had threatened him, and Sanji had recovered from his earlier encounter with Yuki, waiting for Luffy to get back. The crew was in various states of readiness awaiting the arrival of Luffy. They looked pretty intimidating apart for Sanji, who while recovered was standing side on and cringing slightly so not to offer the same target twice. "Oh, who is this super woman that flowered the cook?" Frankie said when Luffy came back into view. "That Barondo had it coming. Only Rabba Luffy can touch me without my say-so. He has had permission for years," she said, winking at Luffy and offering a glare at Nami. Yuki wasn't stupid, she knew competition when she saw it. "I told you to behave and let go," he said, trying, but not too hard, to pull his left arm from her grasp. He had learnt the limit years ago. If he tried too hard, Yuki would think it was a love tussle. Oh come on Robba Luffy, that only goes into effect after you introduce me. She kissed him on the cheek yet again, giving Nami yet another look, this time of smugness. And you know I have no intention of letting you run away. Luffy scowled at this. By this time Nami and Yuki were still trying to gauge the other's threat. If they were cats they would have had all their hair standing on end and prowling around each other. The calm before the storm. Well, Luffy, who exactly is this woman? Nami said through a frown. She spat out the last word like it was tainted. I thought I heard you call her Yuki, right Captain San? Robin asked. Robin attempted to bring some intelligent conversation in rather than veiled insults. Yeah, Luffy said, smiling at Robin's observation. Through all this our rubber man has completely missed the friction between Nami and Yuki. She wouldn't by any chance be Captain Tenshinhan, too, Kyuka Yuki now would she? Who's that? Chopper asked with childlike curiosity. She is a captain of the Marines who joined the Marians about 3 years ago. It is said that she holds the record for fastest ascension to the rank of captain the Marines have ever seen. Really? Chopper said with stars in his eyes. Yep, Yuki said and grabbed Luffy's arm tighter. I did it in less than a year, Reindeer-sama. It doesn't make me happy that you actually recognized me as a reindeer, you bitch, Chopper said with a smile on his face and his arms swaying back and forth. Does he have Tourette's, Robba Luffy? Yuki inquired while obviously flirting with Luffy. Luffy chose to ignore this and answer the question. I honestly have no idea, Yuki-san. Unfortunately for Luffy, thanks to the incredible power of selective hearing and human delusions, Yuki heard the word Chan instead. Kya, she squealed again as she went in to kiss his lips. However, Nami would have none of that and stepped in and pushed Yuki and her Luffy apart. Yes, that's all well and good, but what are you doing here? What's your connection with Luffy? And what was that light before you got her? Nami barraged her with questions while implanting herself reasonable close to Luffy. Luffy nevertheless seems to remain oblivious. It was probably an after effect of her dissensions from heaven. Sanji spoke up, finally recovering his standard I love women mood. Sanji was promptly shut down. No one asked you, Sanj-kun, Burondo. Nami and Yuki yelled at him and went back to glaring at each other. A seagull directly behind Yuki died from a heart attack. Some of the wood behind Nami started to crack and shrivel. Looks can kill. After several minutes Robin cleared her throat again, bringing Nami and Yuki out of their unofficial staring and killing contest. I too would like an answer to those questions to Marine-san. Robin sensed no killing intent towards the rest of the crew. Whatever she disliked Nami for must have been personal. Oh right, she cleared HD herself for her speech. Yuki pulled something out of a pocket on the interior of her coat. She then began to unfold the object several times and slowly it turned into a board with pictures drawn on it. She then pulled out a pointer from another pocket on her coat and extended it. There are so many things Luffy should have known. Yuki loved visual aids and she always made her explanations colorful. He should have known he was cause of the Nami vs Yuki glares. He should have known this was going to be a word of trouble, but he didn't. Whoever said ignorance is bliss deserves a Gomu Gomu no bazooka right up there. The Yuki's explanation began. Learning, Yuki loved to talk. And being a world-class tactician, she loved to plan. So out of this she ended up explaining things. Of course this doesn't explain her collapsible board full of pictures. This, of course, was explained by her infatuation with Luffy. Luffy always remembered something when there were pictures of some kind involved, and Yuki wanted Luffy to remember everything she said. So out of years of explaining herself with pictures it became habitual and was the only way she could find to explain herself. As Nico-sama has said, my name is Kyuka Yuki, she said with a smile on her face. But that's not what you wanted to know. She smirked at the orange-haired evil woman as growled at her. Yeah, so, get on with. The stupid and obviously wrong for Robba Luffy orange-haired woman interjected. Hehehe, Yuki smirked, glad to have irked this vile female. Well, I guess since you ask so nicely, sarcasm evident in her voice, I suppose I could answer your question. Would you like me to answer them in another order? Or are you happy with the one from before? This received yet another glare. Well anyway, Yuki began, the reason I came, she's probably here to capture us and turn in our bounties, Sogeking interrupted crying. Yuki tried again, the reason I came. Or maybe she came to because she has loved me from afar for too long and has finally come to introduce herself to me. Sanji interjected as well. Oh yeah, I really got that impression when she kicked Ya in the sack, arrow cook, Zoro scoffed. What did you say, you moss-headed asshole? The Barondo said. And what's wrong with green hair, Burondo? Removing her cap and showing her hair, which fell to her mid-back, to this unobservant Barondo. Nothing, it looks absolutely beautiful. Hearts were back in Sanji's eyes. Oh yeah, and like you know anything about beauty, Barondo? Yuki continued. I mean, look at you. Sanji looked at himself. Come on, any Barondo can look good in a suit. She pointed at his outfit, his standard black suit with a robin egg blue undershirt. It takes a real man to make a straw hat and red vest look good. She batted her eyelashes with an overdone sigh towards Robba Luffy, completely ignoring the glaring, the evil orange-haired bitch. Will you get back on track, damn it, I want my questions answered? The seductress screamed again. Another obvious reason she was no good for Robba Luffy, she was way too noisy and impatient.
Yeah, can we finish this? Robba Luffy whined, clutching his stomach. I'm hungry. This comment earned him an elbow in the stomach from the bitch who was far too close to Robba Luffy for Yuki's liking.
Of course, Robba Luffy, Yuki said as she put her cap back on her head, not bothering to retuck her hair underneath it. As I was saying before I was interrupted, she glared at the Barando, who smiled because she looked at him. The reason I came here was to see Robba Luffy, she said, smiling at him. I had hoped to see you when your grandpa went to Water 7, but he wouldn't let me come with. The jerk. Luffy nodded at this, and got another elbow from that woman. Don't worry, Sogeking-sama, she said as she looked at said man who was hiding behind the mast. If I turned in any of you, I would have to turn in Robba Luffy. Everyone gasped at this, but I have no intention of doing that, so I would have to explain why I didn't turn over Robba Luffy, and then I would most likely be court-martialed, and I love the Marines too much to let that happen. But I love Robba Luffy more, so I would do it in a heartbeat if circumstances made it happen. It's so beautiful, Cuddy Flam said, clearly crying. Are you crying, Cyborg-san? Nico-sama asked. Of course not, Cuddy Flam said with a shaky voice. I just got the sun in my eyes. But you're wearing sunglasses, Frankie, aren't you? Voiced Sogeking. I believe we drifted off topic again. That wicked seductress spoke up. There was no friendliness there, but then again she obviously was an evil bitch.
I'm still hungry. Oh, I'm so sorry, Robba Luffy, turning back to her love. I'll try to finish my intro this time, but I'm afraid that this will take a little longer, okay? Yuki said, smiling at him. Fine, he said with a pout, and again that evil bitch hit him. Okay, she inhaled deeply so she could get this over with as soon as possible and get her Robba Luffy something to eat. Robba Luffy and me are both grandchildren of vice admirals in the Marines. Yuki began, pointing to a picture of them and their grandparents. Garp and Luffy were standing next to a thin old man who had the 10-year-old version of Yuki standing in front of him, latched onto her favorite thing, Robba Luffy's arm. My grandfather and his were best friends since, well, forever as far as I'm concerned. She hurried on, trying not to let anyone interject or she might get off topic again.
Unfortunately, I did not meet Robba Luffy until I was 10. My grandfather, she pointed to the thin man. Kyuka Kusabana. 1. Don't even think about laughing. He broke Garp's arm when he did the first time they met for doing that. He was very busy before and could not get out to visit Garp before then, and introduced me to him, Robba Luffy and Ace. And the reason Ace isn't here is because Ace was taking the picture. The first time I really met Robba Luffy was when she pointed to a different picture, this one of a mangy looking cat. Saved me from this cat. Everyone but Robba Luffy gave her a strange look. The cat didn't look very dangerous. I know it doesn't look like much, but I used to be very afraid of cats, and this one was nastier than it looks. Anyhow, and I know you were dying to know this, even you didn't ask, she smirked as the orange bitch raised an eyebrow. I started calling Robba Luffy, because of his powers from his devil fruit. I had no idea what else it could mean and gave both Garp and Grandpa a heart attack. Yuki saw that the bikini-clad bitch breathed a sigh of relief, so she quickly added suggestively, however, I hope to make that his official connection to me before too long. I mean, I was his first kiss and vice versa, why not be each other's first, and that too, it isn't like I have any real competition. And WHO says that postion's still open. Robba Luffy responded, forgetting all about his hunger. He'd made the introductions to specifically stop Yuki saying this. Oh, you practiced for me, how nice of you, Yuki said, turning it into what she wanted to hear. That's not what I meant, he said, and after casting a quick glacé to the bitch at his left. And you still haven't answered Nami's third question? The evil woman smiled at this, although no one saw because everyone's attention were on either Robba Luffy or Yuki. Oh yes, sorry, she said, and silently cursed herself for making Robba Luffy wait. About 2 years ago, as you know, I archived the rank of captain. Everyone nodded at this. She then pointed to a picture of a white fruit shaped almost like a cross between a strawberry and a cherry that was unmistakable a devil's fruit. Well, after this, Grandpa got me the hi no mi. 2. Sogeking-sama, Reindeer-sama, Cuddy Flam, and the Barando all gasped at this, as a congratulatory present. Hi. 3. Robba Luffy interjected. No wonder your ass is red, oof. He was jabbed again by the bitch. Luffy, how dare you speak to a lady in, the Barando started but was. Kya, Yuki squealed. I knew you were looking back there, dancing back and forth in her position. Captain San, she said. Hi, not hi. Nico-sama interjected, trying to steer the conversation back to topic. Yes, anyway. Yuki shaking her head to try to get serious again, but it was so hard to concentrate on anything with Robba Luffy so close. As I was saying, I ate the hi fruit, which turned me into a light woman. As you may have guessed, this is a logia type fruit. However, unlike most logia users, I don't turn to light unconsciously, I have to will it to happen. Also, unlike most ability users, I don't automatically sink in the water. Truth be told, it's hard to even get my head underwater, my buoyancy is too high. After saying this, she of a glass prism. And using a prism I can make a clone of myself for each color of the rainbow. You know what that means, don't you, Roba Luffy? He shook his head vigorously horizontally, which meant that he knew where she was going with this but just didn't want to say anything. That's right, I could be your own personal harem. His cheeks slightly colored and the woman in slutty shorts' face lit up. But don't worry, I'm a hinin. Fore. We won't have to worry about kids until later. She smiled when his cheeks colored more and the seductress looked ready to pass out from all the blood rushing to her face. She then pointed a picture of her private boat that she had arrived on. Also, I can use my powers to make my ship. She dropped her pointer in realization. Oh my god, my ship. She ran to the side of the ship, looked back and forth until she found her boat a fair distance from the pirate ship. Yuki then backed up from the edge of Roba Luffy's ship to get a running start, then jumped over the edge and turned into light to get to her ship. Well, I guess the explanation's over for now, so Sanji, make dinner and don't forget lots of meat. Roba Luffy paused for a moment. Also set a place for Yuki. Why should he do that, Roba Luffy? The seductress said, desperately trying to hide the jealousy in her voice with sarcasm. Because, Roba Luffy said with a nod, if we don't she will make me feed her mine. Stated as if for common sense, and then began pushing the barando to the kitchen. Curses. When that woman Yuki had left, Nami had been thanking every deity she had ever heard of that woman was leaving, forever.
However, soon after she was cursing those same deities when it seemed that Luffy was pointed out that Yuki was coming back soon.
After Luffy had dragged Sanji-kun and the rest of the male members into following him to the kitchen, Nami began to glare at the side of Sunny where Yuki had leapt from earlier. Any problems, Navigator-san? Clearly already knowing the answer. Nami cursed her for this and stayed quiet, waiting for Robin to move onward. However, after a few minutes of not moving from either of them, the silence became incredibly uncomfortable and Nami finally spoke up. I don't like that woman. She immediately cursed. Of course someone like Robin might deduce the real reason for this, which she didn't really want. Oh really? Robin said with a smile. I hadn't noticed. She cast her gaze to the other side of the boat. Poor girl, I wonder why you hate her. This earned her evil look. Sorry, Navigator-san. Her smile growing wider, but it wasn't that hard to figure out. I mean, just cause she says she's harmless doesn't mean she isn't out to get us, Nami quickly added, trying to steer clear exactly of what Robin had determined. I'm of course referring to Captain San, Robin added cheekily, so much of steering clear. I mean, she is a part of the Marians, Nami said, trying to make excuses. Cap, Robin began but was cut off when Nami continued. Just because she knows Luffy doesn't mean she can be trusted. I'm a little surprised that you don't like this Yuki woman, Navigator-san. And why's that? Nami tossed out, not looking at Robin. I don't see any reason I should. I suppose you didn't, you were more preoccupied. Robin responded, smiling yet again. At this, Nami raised an eyebrow at her fellow female crewmate, silently asking her to explain what she was talking about. It's just that you seem to me that you two have a lot in common, the older woman explained her earlier statement. To this, Nami blanked and cursed herself. She hadn't been that obvious, had she? She used to be so good at not letting anything show. Had she really lost that much of her old self? She wondered how much more has she been changed by Luffy. However, whatever Nami's thoughts, she still tried to disprove that statement, so she quickly responded, I don't understand what you mean by that. I expect that's because you don't wish to, Robin said under her breath. She then continued with, I mean, you both have similar taste in clothes. Wasn't that the outfit you helped me pick out, only in red? This was true. Nami had helped Robin get that outfit. Of course, this was just to get the Oharan women to stop borrowing her clothes. It's just a popular style, Nami redirected. She also seems rather smart. So, the response covers most topics. You both were raised by Marines, if memory serves? That's a coincidence. There's also Captain. I've heard enough of this, Nami interrupted. I'm going to change before dinner. Can you make sure that she doesn't do something? I'd like to keep everything the way it is, at least for a little while. Moving to her room at a brisk walk. A short while later, Nami emerged, having donned a blue dress shirt over her bikini top, and moving quickly to the dining area, having decided that she did not want to leave Luffy alone, or relatively alone, with that woman who seemed to take every opportunity to make a move on Luffy. And what made her more annoyed was that Luffy didn't even try to stop her from doing it. Nami smiled to herself upon her arrival to the dinner area. Yuki wasn't there yet. After discovering this important fact, she took the opportunity to observe the rest of the crews. She noticed that Sanji-kun was not in the dining area, which was not too surprising. He was most likely still preparing dinner, considering that there were now, unfortunately, 3 women dining on this ship. Sanji-kun would be going all out. Usopp was sitting on the far right side of the table with Chopper, trying to explain why Yuki kept on calling him Sogeking. I'm telling you, you just heard wrong. But I could have sworn that's what she said. Well, he was rather cool, but compared to me. Usopp paused for dramatic effect. What? Chopper said, tried to goad his answer. He's about as cool as my toenail, lifting up his shoe. Really, he said, completely falling for the lie in a completely susceptible manner. Nami then turned her attention away from them as Usopp started on a rant of how much greater than Sogeking he was. Her attention then drifted to the other side of the room as she stared walking toward the table. Her other male crew members were not doing much of anything, at least not anything noteworthy. Zoro was, surprise, sleeping at the left end of the table. And Frankie was trying to tune his guitar, although she didn't see the point, he always sounded terrible. Finally her feet stopped moving and she realized that she was right next to Luffy's right. She was mildly confused as to how she wound up there, but instead of moving, which would draw attention, she just smiled to herself and sat down next to her captain. Luffy was sitting at the middle of the table, where he always sat. She thought that maybe it was strategic positioning so that he could reach everyone else's food. However, she abandoned that idea when Luffy whined, "So hungry," with drool coming out of his mouth as his head laid on the table. Come on, this is Luffy. He couldn't even spell strategic, much less do anything involving the word. It will just make it worse if you keep bringing it up, scolding him. Sanji-kun will be finished soon enough and we can eat as soon as Robin comes down, she said, not mentioning Yuki, hoping he'd forget her presence on the ship if she wasn't mentioned. However, Nami was soon cursing silently again when Zoro woke up and spoke seemingly despite this desire. Don't forget that Yuki woman, I kinda like her, said with a smirk. On the other side of the table Usopp picked up and decided to add his 100 berry to the conversation. Don't let her hear you say that. Usopp then crossed his legs. You saw what she did to Sanji for kissing her hand. It hurts just thinking about it. As if hearing their names, Robin and Yuki entered from upstairs at the same time as Sanji-kun came from the kitchen with a tray of food ready to serve and a great deal of plates. As soon as he saw that Robin and Yuki enter, he got hearts surrounding him and said, "Ah, you are just in time. Robin-chan and Yuki-chan, I was." Sanji-kun was interrupted when a piece of glass collided with his face. "You don't get to call me that, Burondo." With a huff, Yuki then walked over to the fallen cook. "Oh good, you didn't break it." At this, Zoro burst out laughing. "Nice going, woman. I've got to say you're my kind of person. You finally shut up that love cook," Zoro sputtered, holding his sides. "Well, I'm flattered, Zoro-sama, but I have to say I'm not interested." "Huh?" Zoro responded, confused. "However, I could pass on your praise. Maybe, Ensign Toshigi-sama." Zoro eyes widened at this, but Yuki continued walking while making her way over to Luffy's other side. "Or maybe your interests lie in older women." She casted a glacé to Robin as she took her seat to Luffy's left. "Maybe Nico-sama." Zoro's, along with Chopper's, Usopp's, Frankie's, jaw fell to the floor at the insinuation. However, Robin seemed to not care to what Yuki was implying. After this craziness, Sanji-kun regained consciousness and began setting the table. After everything was set, but before anyone could dig in, Yuki spoke up. "Is this everything?" "Why yes, Yuki-ch." She and Nami glared at Sanji-kun. "San," he corrected. "Where's everyone else's?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Sanji-kun asked, looking at the spread that could easily feed 13 people. "I mean this could barely feed Luffy." Everyone sighs at the undoubting truth of this statement. "Luffy, whose is your cook and what is he thinking?" Yuki asked, pulling Luffy's head toward her so her question, but he kept his eyes on the food and pointed to Sanji-kun. "The Barondo." Yuki sighs. "Figures. What do you mean by that, Yuki-san?" Nami asked, attempting to be civil. After Robin's comments earlier, she didn't want to give the woman any more suspicions. "Isn't it obvious?" Yuki said in a condescending manner. "It would be to any intelligent person." Nami growled at this. "So much for being civil. Well, since it doesn't seem that anyone gets this, and I'm a little surprised that you didn't catch this before, Nico-sama, I'll tell you." She went for something in her coat but seemed to change her mind. "Luffy, his whole family, have accelerated metabolisms." Yuki explained in a teacher-like way. "If you feed him this amount of, he would have to eat 5 times a day, and would still be hungry." Nami cursed every divine being she knew again. If this was how Yuki was going to act every time she knew something they didn't, it was going to be a long, however the hell long she was staying. Food fights. Luffy couldn't take it anymore. He hadn't eaten in hours and there was a whole bunch of food right in front of him. Also, Yuki's chastising of his crew for not getting something that, although he didn't hide, he didn't want them to know, and besides, Yuki had gone a step further and got it wrong. Luffy didn't have a fast metabable sim, a metable thingy. He just needed to eat more than other people. He didn't have a metable thingy at all. Luffy would much rather have his crew realize he ate more food and bought more food out of being hungry rather than have them think he needed it because of a metable thingy and buy it out of pity. Luffy didn't want their pity. How could he expect them to trust him and follow his orders if they pitied him in any area? So to take everyone's mind off of the subject, he decided that it was time to put things back to normal and did what was always done at meals. He began to eat everything he could get his hands on, absolutely everything edible, and even testing various things for if they were edible. Although he avoided eating off of the female member plates, he also kept his promise to himself. He didn't eat Sanji's meat, or at least for a couple of minutes he didn't eat Sanji's meat, or at least Sanji's meat that wasn't hanging off his plate slightly. I mean, if it isn't fully on your plate, technically, it's not yours. Welcome to the strange and frightening world of Luffy's logic. Immediately after Luffy's mad rush to get everyone's minds off of the earlier subject, they began to fall into their standard mealtime rituals. fighting over food, undisturbed by Yuki's presence there. Unfortunately, this didn't last forever and abruptly changed when Yuki asked the question, "So Luffy, what have you been doing since you left Fuchsia?" Modding unch, Luffy responded with his mouth full of meat and a plastic cup. It had looked edible. "Oh, now don't lie to me, Luffy, I know you too well for me to believe you hadn't had an adventure or two," she said with a pout. "Also, your 300 million berry bounty is proof enough that something interesting happened." Luffy tried his best to ignore her, but after he continued to stuff his face, and everyone else kept on conversing among themselves, she took it as he didn't hear her. So she leaned into his side and brought her mouth to his ear seductively and asked again, "Come on, Luffy, I want to know what the details of what you've been up to." Realizing he wouldn't get her to leave him alone to eat until he replied to her request, Luffy began to tell her all about his adventures, not going in any particular order. Telling her everything from the start of the adventure to the end, then jumping back to the beginning of the next one. Yuki, being semi-polite, waited until the crew finished with each arc of their adventure. They started with their entrance into the Grand Line and their meeting of Princess Vivi. "So it's all thanks to you that your crew was able to get into the Grand Line at all," she said, and decided it would be a good time to start playing footsie and rubbed her foot up against his. They then went on to their meeting with the giant Asans. But before Yuki could respond to this, Usopp began to tell the something he heard from Sogeking about why the giant Asans at Enies lobby were fighting in the first place. This of course brought the storytelling to Water 7 in Enies lobby. "Kya," Yuki screeched and then kissed his scar. "You did all that just to save Nico-sama. You are just the greatest person ever." After saying this, she wrapped her arms around his neck and went in to try and kiss him. However, before their lips connected, Luffy ducked under her arms and slid farther from her and closer to Nami. Luffy then tried to begin the story of what they did for the monkey siblings and the chestnut Asan, but before he could even explain how the giant ship fell from the sky and almost hit them, Yuki asked a rather risque question when she said, "Nay. Luffy, I heard something interesting from one of the men who took part in that buster call." She placed her hand on Luffy's knee. Really WRHAT? Luffy asked with his mouth filled with meat again, but no cup this time. He had learned his lesson. "Well," she moved her hand up his thigh slowly. "He said that you could make any part of your body bigger." She squeezed his thigh. "Is it true? Can you make any part of your body bigger?" She looked down to his lap. This, although the connotation seemed to be lost on everyone else except for him and Nami, caused Luffy to do something he has never done before. He split out the great deal of meat he had within his mouth. Maybe," he sputtered, blushing, his face redder than when he goes gear second. "Don't worry, Luffy." Yuki put her other hand on his leg. "I'm sure you don't need it for that." She smiled cheekily at her own sense of humor. At this, Nami, who dragged Luffy closer to her so that he would be even further from Yuki, decided to pick up where Luffy left off, redirecting the conversation back to their adventures, and began talking about the stuff that happened on Jaya and their adventures in Skypiea. "So that's where you disappeared to and how you wound up landing in that marine stronghold." Luffy then began to talk about how they met Chopper and what really happened in Alabasta. "You were so noble to help all those people like that." After this, they began talking about a whole bunch of miscellaneous stuff that Yuki didn't seem to have a comment about. That mystery mist, filler. That race lead by that candy jerk, movie 4. The Asan with the goats, filler. Zoro's old friend that was posse's by that weird green sword, movie 5. Their first encounter with Ichiko rescuing that giant turtle from that mecha otaku, movie 7. However, it seemed that Yuki found her voice again after the tale of the Davy back games with the split head. "Davy back games?" Yuki asked, confused. "Was it anything like the Jones certification trials?" "Nah, they were much easier than that," Luffy answered, "although roller skating was harder than I thought." "Harder than you thought? You never did it before, Sanji." Usopp, Zoro and Nami screamed together, but then what Yuki had said seemed to reach their minds and they continued, in unison, with, "Wait, Jones certification trials, what the heck are those?" Everyone turned to Yuki instead of Luffy, who had gone back to eating. "What?" Yuki responded to their gaze. "You never heard of them?" Everyone, except for Robin and Frankie, shocked their head to this. "Did you think that just because pirates don't follow traditional rules that they'd let just any Barando call themselves captains?" The original Straw Hats all looked at Usopp at this comment. Usopp had the decency to not attempt a lie. After that, Yuki brought out another board, or maybe it was the same one, with what looked like legal doans put up throughout it. The Jones certification trials is a series of quests, sort of like a scavenger hunt, where potential captains compete for certification, the right to call themselves captain. She pointed to several different pictures, and although you don't have to come in first to get certification, if you do win you get a small boat and supplies for 5 people for 3 months. Yuki then stopped and looked like a thought had hit her. "Oh yeah, what happened to all that? I doubt the trial boat would have named Mary." "It got sucked down a whirlpool that I drifted into," Luffy answered. "Oh my. You did save your license, right?" "Yeah, put it in my back pocket and jumped into a barrel." "Oh, that's good. You almost had me worried." "Wait, back up," Nami interjected. "Are you saying that Luffy?" She put her hands on his shoulders. This Luffy, she shook him, actual has the brains to do well enough on his own to get this certification. Hey, that hurt, Luffy responded in fake pain, and I won, thank you very much. Say what? The original group said again. What? Luffy looked at his nakama confused. It wasn't that hard to believe, was it? How come this is the first we are hearing of this? Nam questioned with one of her own. Yuki decided to answer this. The certificate isn't really required, it's more of way of stopping any idiot roaming the seas calling themselves a captain rather than some stupid barando just suddenly being one. The test is to make the sniveling idiots who would constantly pull out the certificate and boasting from ever being able to be a captain. You should have told us about this before, protested Nami, making the question very clearly addressed to Luffy and acting as though Yuki hadn't spoken. I already had, it didn't seem much point bringing it up, Luffy said through his own, slightly different, logic. They all became quiet after this, which Luffy really hated. So to break the silence, Luffy turned to Sanji and said, Sanji, how about you go get the dessert? He stopped but then quickly added, after looking at the table, and bring out more meat. A small while later they were eating again. Sanji had followed through with both of Luffy's request. However, when Sanji was setting down the varieties of sweets, he made a great mistake. He set down tangerine slices coated in their own juices and then crystallized into a semi-hard shell, which was not only one of Nami's favorite desserts but, if his memory served and Yuki's taste haven't changed, was one of Yuki's as well. All of the negative feeling that Yuki and Nami had for each other, which they had been repressing during dinner to some extent, came back with double the force when both of the girls reached for the dish with the sweets and arrived at the same time. Now Luffy may not have noticed in their first meeting up on deck the death glares that Nami and Yuki gave each other, but it was much harder to miss and ignore when it was directed practically through you. So Luffy took the calm before the storm to sneak under the table and away from ground zero. What do you think you're doing? Nami finally spoke up. I believe I'm getting some dessert, Yuki responded cheekily. Well, get something else, these are mine. She pulled the small bowl closer to her to try and get it out of her grip. What gives you the right to say that? Yuki tugged back. They're closer to me, Nami pulled, I saw them first. They're from my grove, now you're just being selfish. You're one to talk about being selfish, and what's that supposed to mean? You come all the way out here just to throw yourself at Luffy. I had to make sure someone else didn't, that's exactly my point. What right do you have to try and stop them? I have every right. They both continued their tug of war over the candied citrus. It came to an end, however, when Yuki let go of the dish and all of the juices splashed onto Nami's shirt. You just ruined my shirt, Nami screamed and then slapped Yuki across the face. That shirt was ruined the minute that you put it on, Yuki yelled and slapped Nami back. Bitch, slap. Whore, slap. Hussy, slap. Gah. Yuki jumped and tackled Nami onto the table. What are you doing? Chopper yelled. Nami and Yuki were continuing in their fight on top of what remained of dinner. Sanji, do something, aren't they wasting food? The little doctor yelled to the blonde to his right. It's hardly a waste, Sanji responded in a perverted manner. Nami had flipped Yuki over and gained the slight advantage of higher ground while pinning her to the table with her legs around Yuki's waist. Chopper turned to his left and said in a pleading voice, Usopp. Are you kidding? They'd kill me, he replied, too scared to even move. Yuki chose this moment to slip of the hold, grab Nami's legs with her own and flip them over, thereby reversing the exact position. Zoro. Just let them fight it out, it's their problem. Nami and Yuki had grabbed each other by the torso of their clothes and began rolling back and forth on the table. Luffy, he turned to where Luffy had run off to. However, he just shook his head back and forth, signifying he had no intention of getting involved. Mostly because Nami's shirt and the top of Yuki's dresses both had rips in them that showed off their ample cleavages. Frankie, no way, this is super. The shipwright responded and lifted his sunglasses to get a better view. Having let go each other's clothing, they began to grab fistful of their opponent's hair and began to try and pull it from each other's scalp. This act seemed to bring a fight to a standstill. Cut it, Chopper, the only thing a man should bring to a catfight is his attention, Sanji reprimanded the young zone doctor. Let go of my hair, you grass-headed phsyco bitch, Nami screeched. However, Chopper still had one hope left to hopefully avoid a serious injury. Robin, do something, they're fighting over fruit. You first, you oranged-haired harlot, Yuki responded. I highly doubt that tangerines are the root of this fight, Dr. San, Robin retorted while casting a smiling glance at Luffy. However, after a few screams of pain from both of the female combatants, Robin complied with Chopper's request. She used her devil's fruit ability to grow several pair of hands off of both female bodies. She then had the grown hands pinch the back of Nami's and Yuki's hands, making them lose their grip of the other's locks, and quickly pinned both girls to them table to let them calm down. However, that would take a while because Luffy stepped up to the table and grabbed two small pieces of meat that were clinging in each of their hairs and said, the meat is still edible, yes, take that plastic cup, it is worth experimenting. You can eat food off of me anytime, Luffy. Yuki spoke up but then was kicked by Nami and almost restarted the best type of food fight there is, new direction. After Nico-sama calmed down that skinny orange-haired harpy, the fight was all her fault anyway. Yuki decided that she didn't like how her time with Raba Luffy was going. Not that she cared all that much, any time with Raba Luffy was just great. However, they had spent all evening talking about his crew and it seemed that he mentioned the seductress at least once in every story and that was way too much. The harpy only deserved a passing mention once and that's it, absolutely no more. So to change this and get Luffy's attention back on her, she grabbed him by his left arm and dragged the arm out of the dining area. Luffy shortly followed his arm. Much to his annoyance, because there was still food on the table, Luffy solved this problem by promptly stretching his free right arm and succeeded, as grabbing more food than the laws of physics should allow him to hold. After he promptly consumed the food that could have fed 4 people, Yuki dragged him off and had him give her a tour of his new ship. Raba Luffy was never very good with directionality. He liked to wander and he had yet, as far as Yuki knew, to arrive too late somewhere where he needed to be or stuff up at a crucial time. And Luffy likes to wander and Zoro just gets lost. There's a big difference. So just like Yuki wanted, they just wandered around the ship for a while, and when Raba Luffy thought that something was important enough, he told her about it. This ranged from a particularly cool-looking wooden plank to ignoring the advanced mechanics and machines in the ports. Raba Luffy wouldn't need technological vehicles like that anyway. Up on the deck, he showed her where they put fish after they caught them, and that led to the fish tank into the dining area. Raba Luffy was going to show her how strong the glass was by punching it, but Robin-sama advised him to show Yuki something else instead. They then went back down to the eating area and into the kitchen, where Raba Luffy showered her that their big fridge and the lock that the Barondo had put on it, and she guessed that it was made out of sea stone since there was no way it would still be there if it was made of anything else. Yuki promptly explained to Raba Luffy how you could open a fridge by removing its hinges. Luffy then demonstrated these new principles before moving away from the now empty-ish fridge. They then went elsewhere below deck, where he showed her Sogeking's workshop, which is filled with a lot of small twirly things and pretty liquids that made food too hot to eat comfortably. Next they went to the infirmary. She was still a little surprised that Reindeer-sama was their doctor and not just their pet. He was so cute. Raba Luffy then took her somewhere where she wouldn't have thought he would ever want to go, and she was a little surprised that he even had on his ship a library. Well, it wasn't really a library but more what looked like a collection of books organized on shelves, mainly consisting of navigation, history, and medical books, but there was one on someone called Norland which stood out from the rest. What happened next, however, was not as fun as the rest of the evening. Raba Luffy took her to a door and told her that he wasn't allowed to go in there because it was where that bitch made her maps. It seemed that whenever she learned something new about the seductress, harpy, skank, etc., that it just reinforced the fact that she is obviously a bitch. Who was she to say where Raba Luffy couldn't go when he was the captain, and therefore it was his ship and should be allowed to go anywhere he pleased? To a certain extent, Luffy knew almost nothing about first aid, so he should only go to the infirmary when he needed medical attention, but apart from that, Raba Luffy should be able to go anywhere whenever he wanted. After this, Raba Luffy suddenly announced he was tired, would go to bed. Raba Luffy started walking to his room, and thankfully, well, in Yuki's opinion, because of his fatigue, actually forgetting Yuki was still with him. When they arrived at his bedroom, Yuki was somewhat conflicted on the setup of the room. The room was pretty much bare. All that was there were a hammock and a very small dresser. This didn't surprise Yuki much. Raba Luffy always did keep things simple so he wouldn't have that many clothes, and Luffy could fall asleep so easy that one might think he was narcoleptic, so he didn't really need a bed. Despite the logic of the setup, she still didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, he was the captain and should have a much larger bed so that he could get the best rest possible. On the other, that single hammock, which she knew would hold both of their weights by the pattern, would be perfect to snuggle in. While Yuki was trying to make up her mind of whether she liked the room or not, Raba Luffy crawled into his hammock and put his hat over his eyes. Assessment made, she liked it, and with that thought processed, she made her way over to Raba Luffy and, using what skill she had with her ability, she had slowed down her rise in ranks so she could get better control of her powers, which is why, at least in her opinion and those that she worked with regularly opinions, she was still just a captain. She would have had to have been a Barondo to try and rise in the ranks without control of the ability and an abundance of knowledge of how light worked naturally. She moved and placed herself on Luffy's left. She has forgotten why she liked that side so much, and snuggled up against his rubber body. After a few minutes, Yuki had yet to fall asleep. Raba Luffy woke up. "Gah," said Raba Luffy after he became awake enough to realize she was in his hammock with him. He then rolled out of his hammock going to the right, and when he hit the ground he backed up as far as he could and then spoke, "What the hell, Yuki? Where are you doing?" Yuki smiled at her love and his flushed look that only she managed to give him, and said rather simply, "Going to bed. I thought that you could have figured that out." "I knew that, but why are you here?" he screamed again. "Where else was I going to stay? You didn't show me any available rooms. I just thought that there weren't any." She paused before adding in her special manner that she only ever used for Raba Luffy, "or that you wanted me to sleep with you." "Sleep in your bed?" he said quickly, pretending he didn't get the innuendo of her statement, although she knew he did. But I already put it away, Yuki responded, and then she added with a pout, "You're not going to make me take it out of my jacket this late, are you?" "Huh?" Luffy responded, confused. "How is it in your jacket?" "It's a mystery jacket," giving him his answer, the one he came up with when he didn't immediately know how something worked. She did this mainly because she was also becoming tired and didn't really feel like explaining it further and knowing he would accept this answer. "Of course," he said while doing his realization gesture. "Now that you know, are you coming back to bed?" She spoke while opening the hammock for him to get back in. She saw him shiver slightly, the way she said the sentence and how she was holding herself in the hammock simply begged for Luffy to come back and snuggle up to her. Yuki smiled when Luffy got up off of the floor but then stopped when he began to walk to the door and said, "As soon as we get you somewhere to sleep." "Ah, Luffy," Yuki said while crossing her arms in front of her chest and pouting. After finding her a room, they went their separate ways for the night. However, that was not fully by Yuki's choice. Apparently the rest of Luffy's nakama had been woken up by his screaming, and that evil woman had made the Barando stand guard over Luffy's room, and when she tried to sneak back in he said that he couldn't let her go in. But he might let her go in anyway if she gave him a kiss. So because she would rather be eaten by a sea king than kiss a Barando, she went back to her room. However, she got a little more alone time the following morning. Yuki knew almost instinct I would wake up, so she usually woke at the same time. When she awoke, she changed out of her torn red dress and into a tight red t-shirt and even tighter black shorts before slipping on her marine coat. She loved the color red, even if it clashed with her hair, and some of the more Barandos would make fun of her choice, saying she looks like a Christmas tree. They never said it more than once, she made sure of that. She loved the color because Luffy always wore it and she wanted to always make sure their outfits didn't clash. Yuki met Luffy out on his deck just in time to see the sunrise. It then dawned on her that she forgot to give him the present that she had for him. But instead of just giving it to Luffy, which is why she originally brought it, she realized that this would be better utilized by using it to get him to do something for her. "Nay, Luffy," she called out to him, bringing his attention to her. "Huh, oh hey Yuki, what are you doing up so early?" he said to her, but not taking his eyes off the ocean. "I just remembered something that I have that you might be interested in," she said while taking out the item she wanted to give him from one of her pockets and placing on the side of the boat in front of him. "What's this?" he said while picking up the object. "It's an eternal pose, Luffy," replying cheekily. "I knew that," he screamed at her while she smiled. "But where does it go?" he said while bringing the pose closer to him to read the name of the island that it was drawn to. When it got close enough, his jaw dropped and he got stars in front of his eyes. "Really?" he asked, final looking at her. "Hi Luffy," Yuki said, taking it back. "But Nami keeps saying it doesn't exist," he stated in a skeptical manner. "Isn't that what people said about that island in the sky and you went there?" she said, not liking that he was questioning her based on what that hussy said. "Oh yeah," he said while doing his realization gesture. "Then I better wake everyone up and tell them we're going to." Yuki garbed his arm to stop him from running off. She said while moving her index finger back and forth. "That's not yours and you said I'd let you use it." "Ah Yuki, that's evil," Luffy said while he pouts.
"Don't worry Luffy," she said while putting the eternal pose back in her pocket, "you can have it."
"Really?" he said, instantly cheering up. "Yes," she answered, "however you have to do something for me." "Alright," he nodded. "Do you promise?" "Sure," he said while nodding again. "Kya," she squealed. She would definitely get what she wanted now. Luffy would never break a promise. "Alright Luffy, do you remember that party we went to the day before I left to join the Marines?" "Yeah, but what?" he began but stopped when he fully remembered what they did there. No way, not going to happen. I don't wanna," he said, taking a step back with each statement. "But Luffy," she said, closing the distance between them, "you promised. Can't I do something else? Anything else?" trying to get out of his promise without breaking it. "Anything," she said while looking him up and down. I didn't mean, fine," he sputtered but finished with dropping his head. She stepped forward and began to unbutton his vest. "I meant to the first option," Luffy screamed while taking her hands away from his shirt. "Oh darn," Yuki sulked. She was hoping that he would agree to go south to get his ship to go west. No. Nami had a great deal of dreams that usually repeated, both nightmares and pleasant dreams, with a great deal of regularity. This night she was having a new dream that she was sure she would have again, but she was uncertain of whether or not this was a nightmare or a fantasy. It started out pleasant enough, almost exactly like her dream from yesterday. She was alone with Luffy sunbathing on an island made out of treasure. The sand was gold. The rocks were silver. The tree leaves were made from emerald. Their fruits from rubies. Even the ocean was made of treasure, water filled with sapphires and diamonds. However, the dream quickly changed into a somewhat nightmare. Right before Luffy came in to remove her top and the dream would become very pleasant, someone else called out to him, "Luffy." Both of their heads turned to the sound and the dream. Nami scowled. It was Yuki clad in a swimsuit that was pretty close to what she was wearing yesterday. "Oh hi Yuki," Luffy said while walking over to her with a smile on his face. "Robba Luffy." She grabbed onto his bare shoulders. In Nami's dreams Luffy never wore more than a pair of shorts and his hat, and dragged him in to kiss her. However, soon after this kiss started, and it seemed that there was no intention of either to stop, a giant lizard sea king with Nami's head with a body made out of gold came up from the sea and ate Yuki. At this time Luffy came back to Nami. The dream then continued where it left off before Yuki's appearance, and even some corny romantic music started playing. However, before she could remove his pants, Nami realized that the music wasn't just part of her subconscious, it was actually playing outside. After this realization, Nami opened her eyes upset that her dream was interrupted just before getting to the good part. What the hell is that noise? She didn't even have a guess of where it was coming from, but she knew one thing, it sure as hell wasn't from anyone from her crew. For one, it actually sounded good, and another, it sounded more like multiple instruments, and the only other person that played any kind of instrument was Usopp, and was just barely better than Frankie with his small drum. When the music didn't stop, she decided to get out and figure out what was causing that sound, so she got out of bed and changed into a tight denim skirt that went to her mid-thigh and a gray shirt with the English word evil across the front with a low neckline. After finishing getting dressed, she went out into the hall where the rest of the crew were starting to come out of their rooms. "What's going on?" Chopper spoke up while rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "I don't know," Usopp said through a yawn while speaking, "but it's much better than way to wake up than having water dumped on your head." It was at this moment Nami took in the full hallway and noticed that there are only 5 people in the hall, not including herself. Zoro's absence wasn't surprising because he had the night watch and by now was probably sleeping up on deck by now, and while she couldn't care less where Yuki was, the fact that Luffy was also missing gave her much to worry over. Last night she had asked Sanji-kun to make sure no one went into or out of Luffy's room to make sure that Yuki didn't try something in the middle of the night. Although she wasn't sure if she should have wasted her time asking, he would probably get out of the way for a peck on the cheek. But the small obstacle was better than nothing, and she couldn't stand watch herself in case Luffy or one of the other members might stumble and ask questions, which is also why she couldn't ask anyone else. Sanji-kun would do what she asked without question in an attempt to please her and get the small scrap of affection. So because of these facts, she decided it would be a good idea to check their rooms. Of course checking Yuki's first, and when she found it empty she thought of smacking Sanji-kun. However, before she followed through with this action, she second-guessed herself. No, just because she isn't there doesn't mean she's with Luffy, right? Unable to convince herself, she decided to check Luffy's room. When she got to his door, she stopped, took a deep breath, and prepared herself to either have her hopes or suspicions confirmed. Though when she opened his door, neither were there. All that was there was an empty room, meaning that they could be together but still maybe not. What is that super music? The cyborg carpenter, who she couldn't really look at because he was only wearing a Speedo and his sunglasses. "I believe that it is a waltz, cyborg-san," Robin said, identifying the music. Shortly after Robin's statement, Nami started to make her way up to the deck. And what she found when she got there, she was not happy with what she found but not surprised initially. Luffy and Yuki were together, and even more annoying, they were facing each other. Luffy's right hand was in her left and his other hand was on her waist. They were also moving around in a triangle-like formation. After that final piece of information reached her mind, Nami thought, holy hell, they're dancing. Then she added out loud, wait, Luffy can dance. This new ability that she discovered Luffy had, and he was actually pretty good. He moved with the music and didn't step on her feet at all. Just didn't go with his personality. He just didn't seem like someone that would ever go dancing. Dancing seemed far too romantic for her childlike captain, and no matter how sweet he was in her dreams, she would never expect anything like this in the waking world. So the shock of this paradox just kept her glued to her position, watching them dance and wishing she had the nerve to ask him to dance with her. Oh, it seems that is where Captain San and Marine San went. She then cast her glacé to the side of the ship. And that explains the music, she said, pointing to a Denden Mushi that had spinning black disc attached to its back. That damn shitty lucky bastard. Sanji-kun spoke up, final coming up from Hidek. Nami-san. Robin-chan, would either of you like to dance? Sanji-kun asked with hearts all around him. Nami just ignored his offer and Robin turned him down nicely with a, no thank you Cook-san, it is a little too early. Would you get me some coffee please? Hi Robin Schwan, and he left to get the archaeologist her morning drink. Nami went back to watching the couple waltz. It was incredible. Luffy was incredibly graceful the way he led Yuki around the deck and delicately flowed around her and with her in elaborate movements. Not once did he stumble or step on her feet. It was as though the two of them were in a world of their own. Nami was seeing a completely new side of Luffy that she had never seen before, and it scared her. Why hasn't Luffy ever acted like that with me? The more she watched, the more Nami felt like she had missed out big time. After a few more minutes, the waltz finally ended right after Sanji came back with Robin's coffee. All right, now that that's over, Luffy spoke for the first time since the rest of crew's arrival. Now gimme. He reached up and it looked like, from Nami's perspective, that he was going to grope this woman. Nami's heart clenched suddenly. Was Luffy really that far gone? However, all he did was reach up and take off her coat. Though when he removed it from her, it dropped straight down to the floor and forced his arm stretch. At this, everyone's jaw, except for Robin's and Luffy's, dropped. "This is heavy," Luffy, before giving up trying to lift it, and sat on the floor and began to take objects out of the coat. It still hadn't seemed to have occurred to Luffy to use more than an outstretched arm and forefinger to hold up the marine coat. After a few more shock-filled minutes, every time someone came out of it they would be sent back into the shock coma by Luffy removing an object that had no business being in a coat, such as a small stove and fridge, medium dresser, a bookshelf full of books, 12 of those collapsible boards, a small table, a full set of fine china, several berry bushes, a chest full of bear, and a whole bunch of other stuff. "Found it," Luffy said triumphantly while lifting what looked like an eternal pose into the air. "Oi!" Chopper, Frankie, Usopp, and Sanji-kun yell out in unison. "Oh hey guys," Luffy responded to their scream in a calm way. "What's up with that code? It's a mystery code," he stated simple. "Oi, that's not an answer." The four continued to scream in unison while Nami covered her eyes and sweat dropped while Robin just laughed before sipping her coffee. "Now Robba Luffy, that wasn't nice," Yuki spoke, and it actually sounded like she was scolding him. "If you wanted me to strip, all you had to do was ask." At this, Nami's sweat dropped again. The male members of the crew ran down to the lower part of the deck to get a closer look at this so-called mystery code and the contents that were pulled out of it. "Look, this is a special edition of Dr. Hogback's final book," Chopper said, taking several books from the pile. "How did you get it?" he asked Yuki. "To form a proper strategy, one must know what will happen before, during, and after the altercation," answering the doctor from Drum. "Yuki-san is so smart," Sanji-kun screamed in his "I love women" mode. "I wasn't talking to you, Burondo," Yuki screeched at the lovesick blonde. "How does all this stuff fit in this code?" Nami asked while walking to the rest of the crew. She wasn't surprised at all when the green-haired marine captain acted like she didn't hear her stuck-up bitch, and with that red shirt she looks like a Christmas tree. "Nami," she turned her head as Luffy called out to her, "we have a new destination." "Huh? Where'd this come from? Maybe we're going somewhere to dump the tree head." "We're going to the island of meat," he screamed in the same manner he declares any location. "I told you that there is no such place." Nami counted, slightly depressed that they weren't going to ditch the psycho slut. "That's what people said about Skypia," with an insight that seemed unfitting of him. "That was different. We had some evidence that it was real. When our log post pointed upward and that ship almost fell on us, trying to talk out of trying to go to the non-existent place and dragging all of them along. And even if it was real, we would have no way to get there. Here," he tossed the pose he had in his right hand to her. After she caught it, she saw in faded letter T. "You're kidding, right?" Nami said while looking at her captain as if he was certifiable. But when he didn't say anything, she just sighed and deflated. "Of course you're not. Luffy, this could lead anywhere," she said while lifting it up and almost hitting his face with it. "You can barely read the letter. Who's to say this isn't just a trap to get us somewhere?" She paused and looked at him. "Where'd you get this thing anyway?" She had actually forgotten about his earlier declaration of victory. Nami had been more preoccupied with the mere fact that Luffy was dancing gracefully. "Yuki brought it," Luffy answered, finally getting up off the deck. "Of course she did," Nami said in a quiet voice and slumped her shoulders. However, she shook off her depression and quickly added, "That isn't a guarantee that this goes where you think." "Are you trying to imply something?" Yuki asked in a low voice, glaring at the navigator. "Yes, I am trying to imply something. Can't you understand speech?" she glared back. "What would I possibly gain from deceiving Robba Luffy?" 300 million berry, she quipped. "I already told you I'm not interested in that. And I should just believe that just because you say it," Nami said in a slightly raised voice. "You haven't given us any reason to trust you." "I haven't done anything to make you distrust me either. You're a marine, that's reason enough, and I suppose you don't trust Vice Admiral Garp either. Robba Luffy, trust me. If you noticed, he opens up more to me." Nami stiffened at this. She saw the truth in this, but that didn't mean she would give in. Just because Luffy trusts you doesn't mean anything. He is too trusting. As usual, Luffy ignored the barb. "Or maybe you do just not trust enough." At this point, both of these beautiful, high-strung, and extremely jealous women were prepared to restart their fight from last night's dinner. However, before the fight started, it was stopped by the several members of the crew. Luffy and Usopp dragged Yuki away while Chopper, Robin, and Frankie dragged Nami away. Sanji-kun didn't do anything. His views on catfights were well known. After several minutes, Luffy let Yuki go and she spoke up. "Let me go, Soj." Usopp stopped her from revealing his secret identity by putting his hand over her mouth. However, almost instantly he realized his mistake as he looked at his hand and let out a "ah," and removed his hand as if he would burst into flames, which might have happened with the way Yuki was glaring at him.
Sogeking, she said in a tone that the crew was very familiar with, the one that Nami used when she was about to beat the crap out of someone when they did or said something incredible stupid. She then added with a glare, "You touched me without my permission." Sorry, Usopp spoke, shaking madly. "But because you seem to have been very nice to Robba Luffy, I won't kill you." Phew, that's good, Usopp said, whipping the sweat from his brow. Run, Usopp, Luffy yelled a warning to his sniper. And I will give you a 10-second head start. Huh, Usopp responded confused. Before I beat the shit out of you. 1.
Huh? Usopp was still confused. 2. What? 3. No, don't. 4, please. 5, 6, sorry, Usopp trying to calm her down. Seven. I told you to run, Luffy yelled again. 8. Usopp finally realized that apologizing wasn't going to work, and ran back into the door they had emerged from while screaming, "Aw." 9, 10 Get back here you bastard, Yuki yelled before running after the scared liar. Oh Sanji, you're up, Luffy spoke. Good, you can make breakfast. He followed this action by pushing Sanji-kun by his shoulders toward the kitchen. What do you think you're doing, you shitty rubber man, Sanji-kun said with more than a little annoyance at being touched by someone of the male persuasion. Though Luffy just seemed to ignore the cook and kept pushing. Oh Frankie, Chopper, you might want to follow Yuki, she'll most likely break something. Not even look at the people he was talking to as he continued to push, who was actually trying to overpower Luffy and try and stop the movement. WWW, why'd I have to go, she's scary, Chopper whined, but Luffy just kept forcing Sanji-kun to the kitchen to start breakfast. Robin decided to answer for Luffy, he said it already, Dr. San. Huh? Chopper looked at Robin. She'll break something, answering the question full and going after Frankie, Yuki and Usopp. Someone has to stop her before she seriously hurt Usopp, and if any male other than Luffy tried, they would just be added to the body count. Oh right, Chopper responded, and so Nami was left alone on the deck, or at least that's what she thought until she had, geez, what with all the noise, how's a guy supposed to sleep? She looked up to see Zoro coming from the crow's nest. Seeing that he was wiping sleep from his eyes, Nami thought, Zoro must have fallen asleep on watch again, but what else is new? And then added out loud, besides everything, better. Luffy thought that breakfast this morning had gone over much better than any of the meals yesterday. For one, there were no fights, not even one involving Sanji and Zoro. Anytime there was a disagreement between the two, Yuki would tell Sanji to shut his Barando mouth, and Sanji, being, well, Sanji, complied all too quickly. Another was that he didn't get the crap beat out of him for some unknown reason. But most importantly, there was nothing on the table that looked edible but wasn't. The day continued in this fashion for a little while after breakfast. Luffy had managed to sneak away from Yuki after the meal was over. He managed this by doing something he has never done before. He left a meal early by his own free will. Desperate times call for desperate measures. After sneaking off, he hid himself in Usopp's workshop and stayed there by himself until Usopp arrived. Hi Usopp, Luffy yelled when the liar entered the room and failed to notice him. Usopp immediately dropped to the floor and curled up in a fetal position and put his arms over his head while repeating over and over again, "Please don't hurt me." Ha ha ha, that's funny Usopp, Luffy laughed while pointing at his petrified friend. Luffy, Usopp said after a few more seconds of muttering. He realized that it was just Luffy who, relatively speaking, was completely harmless. That wasn't funny. Sure it was, Luffy responded whilst crossing his legs to sit on the floor. His position could almost be considered meditative if it wasn't for the fact he was clapping with his feet every few seconds. What are you doing in my workshop anyway? Usopp asked as he turned around to make more items he could use in the fights that they were sure to have as they continued traversing the Grand Line. He turned his attention to his latest greatest invention, a life-size dummy of himself with built-in insults, perfect for all those enemies he needed to get away from. Avoiding Yuki, Luffy stated with a nod as he watched his sniper work. You call that punch? This ISSS a Puin, the dummy Usopp obviously still wasn't perfect, but it hadn't stopped because of bad hardware. The reason it had stopped is that on the word, Yuki, Usopp had just by chance driven a screwdriver all the way through. ICC can't image why, Usopp spoke shaking madly, SSSSSS she isn't TTTTTT that SSSSSS scary. I'm not scared of you because I'm Captain Usopp. I never said she was, Luffy smiled before asking, so how long did it take? No one can hurt Captain Usopp. Huh, how long did what take? Usopp asked as he raised his goggles to look at Luffy. Usopp's eyes were looking anywhere but at Luffy. How long did it take before Yuki kicked your ass? No one can hurt Captain Usopp. Which he didn't even lay one finger on me. Luffy looked over his nakama before he replied, yeah right. What did she fight like Sanji and only kick you? You don't believe me, no one can hurt Captain Usopp. Of course not, the captain responded immediately. What, why not? He asked deflated. You're more bandage up than after the Frankie family ambushed you. No one can hurt Captain Usopp. No one can hurt Captain Usopp. No one can hurt Captain Usopp. I'm just cold, he lied again. Also I know Yuki, so how long did it take? Really she didn't. Luffy just stared at him. Honestly, Luffy just narrowed his eyes. Really, Luffy crossed his arms to increase the intensity of his gaze. Just then Usopp's dummy seemed to provide some useful information and again spouted its wisdom as a parrot does. No, I don't want to die, please no, don't hurt me, it was an only RABA, Luffy can't touch me there, please no, hey, what are you doing with that? Oh damn, oh shit, oh, The screaming faded into the distance as the recording ended. Again there was a long period of silence. Oh, Usopp dropped his head before finally giving Luffy the information he asked for, 2 minutes. Way to go Usopp, Luffy let out in a loud voice as he smacked the bandaged man on the back several times. Ow, ow, ow. Usopp cried out in pain each time Luffy's hand connected with his back. No one can hurt Captain Usopp. Usopp, I think you've actually broken the avoidance record. Usopp had tears in his eyes as he asked, what record? 2 minutes huh, he looked up in space remembering the many people that Yuki had beat down for getting her mad, the most common reason being that they ruined the atmosphere. But Luffy never knew what she was talking about, the weather was always just the same as before. Oi, I asked you a question, Usopp yelled. I think the only person that could do that was Ace, but he only managed 1.5 before he left. Wah, Usopp started to speak again but was interrupted when the door slammed into the wall. There you are Robba Luffy, Yuki said with a sigh as she walked into Usopp's workshop. Ow hey Yuki, Luffy said but continued to think about the last time Ace had made Yuki upset and the resulting trip to the doctor. Robba Luffy, that harpy of a navigator isn't changing direction. Huh, you're still on course to Merman Island, Yuki finally said what was so important. What? After saying this Luffy ran out of the workshop and ran, almost, as fast as he could to the deck, and when he arrived on the deck he let out, Nami. Huh, what is it Luffy? His more than slightly attractive navigator spoke looking up from a little white book she was using to take notes on the weather changes. Why aren't we going to the island of meat, Luffy? We talked about that. Nami sounded more than a little sad as she spoke these words. There's no guarantee that eternal post even goes to the island it says. But, Luffy started but Nami interrupted. And even if it did, who's to say that it isn't just the name of the island, because of its shape or something dumb like that? The ex-thief took a breath but continued before Luffy could get a word in. Or maybe not even that, like I said before, you can barely make out the 4 letters, you can see who's to say that it's not just part of the name. But I've decided. We're going to the island of meat. Luffy spoke in such a way as to actually start an argument. He did this for several reasons. 1, he really wanted to go to the island of meat, and 2, as Sanji would put it. Which is exactly why Luffy would never dare say it out loud. Nami was hot when she was angry. Even if you say that it's not like the island's going anywhere, we can go there anytime we have that eternal post, she said while stressing the word eternal. Where did you get your colorant? Yuki spoke finally arrive above deck. What did you say? Nami asked clearly confused, of course so was Luffy. I asked where you got your hair dye, Yuki rephrased. What are you talking about? She was still confused. I'm just wondering, it's really good I can't see your roots at all, Yuki smirked final. What are you saying, I don't dye my hair, retorted back offended. You could have fooled me with that last statement. Yuki raised her hands and closed her eyes as she said. How's that? Nami asked glaring at the green-haired woman. It's just that I would have only expected something so stupid to come from the mouth of a Barando. What's so stupid about waiting until later to go? Have you even looked at my gift to Robba Luffy? Yuki said this and brought her hand to her chest at the stressed word. It not pointing in the same direction where going currently. If you don't change course now you're just waste more time. Nami put her hands on her hips before stating, that's even more reason we have to wait. I have no idea where this island is, how long it will take to get there, and thus we might run out of supplies before arriving. Luffy had to nod at this speech. It made a lot of sense even if it meant he would have to wait to go where he wanted. 2 weeks, Yuki responded flatly. Huh? Nami and Luffy made this confused noise at the same time. If we change course now we will arrive at the island of meat in ATND. How can you possibly know that? Nami spoke and rolled her eyes. Are you sure you don't dye your hair? Yuki chuckled at this statement. Do you honestly think I would get Robba Luffy a present without making sure it worked? Nami growled right after Yuki said this. He couldn't imagine why they just got definitive proof that they were going to the island of meat. Luffy wasn't sure the day could get better. The crew had started to gather around these 3, some to make sure that Nami and Yuki didn't get into a fight, Chopper and Robin, and everyone else, even Usopp who had followed Yuki and was hiding behind the door frame to below deck, to make sure they got a good view if, and more likely when, they did. Oh, so you've been there have you? Nami's voice was oozing sarcasm. Then tell us what makes this island called meat. The island of meat. All right, I will. At this she pulled out several collapsible boards from her coat and began to set them up. How does all that fit in your jacket? The half-reindeer asked in his brainpoint. Oh hello reindeer-sama. Yuki spoke finally realizing that there were other people there. I suppose I could tell you, unless Hedai-san. 1, here can't wait. I have 2 things to say to that. 1, Nami raised her middle finger at Yuki. I don't dye my hair. And 2, she raised her pointer finger. I want to know the answer to that also, so go ahead. Luffy sat down on the floor and positioned himself to get comfortable. As Yuki got out more of her boards, there were about 7, now set in 2 groups, one of 1 and one of 6. He knew this would take a while. Yuki had to explain 2 things, although he didn't see why she had to. The island of meat was the island of meat because it was the island of meat, and he had already explained the code. What wasn't clear about it being a mystery jacket. But he could understand that his nakama might want more information than that, so he didn't voice a complaint about them wasting time by making these simple answers complicated. Well, the answer to your question, Reindeer-sama, is quite simple really, Yuki said while pointing to the first board. My jacket has eaten the poke no mi. 2. Devil's fruit. Oh come on, how can a code eat anything? I'm practical a professional liar, and even I can't believe that. Usopp interjected from his hiding place. Yes, Marine-san, how does that work? Robin asked, seeking information. I'm not quite sure, Nico-sama, it's a bit technical and I'm no scientist. Luffy could see Nami smirk at Yuki's first admission of imperfection. But from what I know, it was done by a doctor. Oh, what was his name? I can never seem to remember. Yuki closes her eyes to concentrate. I should know this. I should know this. He was nice enough to give it to me personal. Oh well, it will come to me later. Yuki final opened her eyes, giving up on trying to remember the mon's name. Anyway, after he made the code, eat this fruit. Now that I think about it, it was one of his early experiments. He has shied away from using anything but zone-type fruits. Apparently they work better or something like that. He gained the ability to make a pocket of almost any size anywhere on the inside. Yuki took a deep breath after this but was interrupted. That doesn't exactly explain how you can even walk with all that stuff in the code, Nami interjected. I was getting to that, Hedai-san, Yuki hollered, then cleared her throat before adding. Also, after the object is put into the code, its weight gets reduced to about 1/1000th of the original weight. To give you a more accurate example, at the moment the code only weighs 50 kilograms, even though I have about 50,000 kilograms worth of objects in it. Why? Nami began to ask but was interrupted when Luffy began to snore.
Oh, he's so cute when he's sleeping, Yuki practically squealed. Luffy was asleep sitting up and had a bubble coming in and out of his noise. I wonder if it works when the genders are switched, she asked no one as she squatted down in front of the future Pirate King.
Yuki then moved in to kiss the rubber man, but right before their lips touched, Nami grabbed the marine captain by her hair and dragged her away from the sleeping 17-year-old. Yuki's scream of pain had actually woke up the man in the straw hat. What was that for? Yuki growled at Nami, then looked at the slowly waking pirate. Great, another moment wasted. You were drifting off topic. I still want to know what's so special about that island. Fine, Yuki said before adding, Hedai-san. Nami growled at her new nickname. It's rather simple really, the island of meat is the island of meat because it's the island of meat. Yuki nodded each time she repeated the phrase. However, since that is clearly not enough information for you to go on, at this point she walked back over to her lineup of boards. All livestock animals grow from 3 to 20 times their normal sizes. She pointed to the first board of the section, which had several barnyard animals that were much larger than the people in the photo. These animals also have very little body fat, so when they are killed for food, the meat also has very little fat and of very high quality. She pointed to the second and third boards of the section, which had pictures of cooked meat covering them. Also, like you suggested before, Hedai-san, the island looks like a piece of meat from above. She showed them a map depicting this. And what actual makes this island, the island of meat, and not just some island with really good cattle raisers, is that different types of meat that actual grows on the trees. She slammed her pointer into the fifth board. Bushes, she repeated the action on the sixth. And even some of the vines, she smashed her pointed into final picture. Oh come on, that's I am. Nami started but was interrupted when Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper all let out. That's so cool, possible. Nami finished but then let out a huge sigh before saying, I should have known something like this was going to happen anyway. She slumped her shoulders as a blue cloud of depression started to surround her. Luffy didn't like her like that at all, so to cheer her up he said the first thing that came to his mind. Nami, just think of all the berry we will save if we get some of those meat-growing plants. Nami's reaction was immediate and predictable. She instantly came out of her depression and with berry signs in her eyes and screamed. Alright, we're going to the island of meat, and Luffy thought right after her deceleration. They're much better, week 1. It has been 1 week since Yuki had arrived on Robba Luffy's ship, which she learned was called Thousand Sunny, and for the most part everything was fine. Oh, there were some rough spots the first couple of days. She had to spend the first 3 days apologizing to Sogeking-sama about the assault on him. Although she wasn't completely sorry, he had touched her lips and they were for Robba Luffy's use only. Because it had taken her so long to get him from going completely comatose when she entered the room, she had learned a great deal about him. It seemed that he fought a great deal like she did. They used different items to force their enemies off guard and move them in location for their next attacks. Of course, there was a clear difference in their tactics. She always tried to make sure that the opponent would end up down, where he would try his best just to make it out alive. But she could understand why he did. It seemed that he was easily frightened and never really had to fight for his life. That is before he met Robba Luffy. Also, he was extremely naive. He didn't just see the glass half empty, he saw it on its way to becoming completely empty. After that, when she wasn't with Robba Luffy, although that was not very often, but still far more than she liked, she was getting to know Robba Luffy's nakama better. She spent her time with Nico-sama. And when she was with Nico-sama, they usually discussed some of the more interesting aspects of history. Although most of Yuki's knowledge on the subject was limited to military history, but they still had enjoyed speaking on the subject. It seemed that Reindeer-sama was an excellent doctor, and it would have been just plain wrong not to take this opportunity to increase her knowledge on first aid. Zoro-sama seemed to do very little around the ship. But it seemed that when he wasn't sleeping he did a lot of training. He was training his body to better handle his Santoryu sword style. Yuki had made the suggestion that he might think about getting some weighted shirts, or wrist weights and leg weights. This way he could be constantly training, even when he sleeps, but still be able to fight at his peak in a fight by simply removing the article of clothing. Although this was not that revolutionary an idea, it had never actually crossed the 19-year-old Maud's mind. However, most of the time she spent with Zoro-sama consisted of them ganging up against the Barando. Speaking of that Barando, it seemed that he was even more of a Barando than she thought. It seemed that he didn't care that she was in love with someone else, he still tried to win her heart. How could a man be so stupid and selfish as to try and steal someone else's women? But it seemed that he wasn't too bad when confined to the kitchen. It was fascinating to watch him cook. He was actually rather good at it. It seemed when he was cooking he didn't get that strange heart in his eye and that outlandish tone in his voice. It seemed that her estimation of how long it would take to get to the island was off. She learned this when discussing the more advanced parts of the ship, basically everything that she didn't learn from her tour with Robba Luffy, with Cutty Flam. It seemed that there was some sort of paddle system and cola engine that could increase the Sunny's max speed, and based on the specs, which Cutty Flam took much pleasure in showing off, saying how super it was, she estimated that it would only take 3 more days before their arrival, maybe even less if the weather was nice. Of course she didn't get to know all of her love's crew members. She tried her best to avoid the evil orange-headed bitch, who from now on shall be referred to as Hedai-san. The only time she has talked to her, besides their hourly verbal assaults on each other, was to inform her that there was no need to worry about the log post resetting while on the island of meat. It's not like they would be there for over 3 months. Of course she did this for 2 reasons. Reason 1. Hedai-san was talking to her Robba Luffy and it was perfect reason to swoop in and separate the two. Reason 2. In one of her conversations with Robba Luffy he had mentioned that after the island of meat he still wanted to see that supposed walking skeleton, and she wanted to reassure him that could still be his next destination, unless they discovered a cooler place to go on the island. However, that all occurred earlier in the week, but what didn't occur, much to Yuki's disappointment, was a real kiss with Robba Luffy. It seemed that his lips were a little harder to get than they were 3 years, 2 months, 6 days, 23 hours, 58 minuets, and 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds ago. Not that she was counting or anything, then again that made sense. He most likely has gotten stronger since coming to the Grand Line, although it could be that she is out of practice of his game of keep away. At this moment Yuki is not with Robba Luffy, and for once it is because she does not want to be near him. Yuki needs time to think, to contemplate, to compose her strategy. Something she had no hope of doing in his company. As she has said before, it is so hard to focus with Robba Luffy around. At this monument Yuki is in the room she is using on Robba Luffy's ship. She has removed what is her stratagem chair from her coat and set it up next to a window. It is basically just a rocking chair with plush white cushions. Maybe I should take a meat, put it between my teeth and ask him to try and take it without using his hand. No, that wouldn't work. Robba Luffy would just barely touch the meat on and use the momentum from the biting motion. Perhaps I could sit in front of him and apply lipstick in a suggestive manner. Nah, that was too subtle. Subtle didn't work for the first 3 years, why would it work now? I could always go with Plan S, Yuki thought as she patted her left hip trough her coat, where the materials for said plan were kept. But no, she couldn't do that. Well, not yet anyway. Plan S was her contingency plan. Her plan in case she was unable to get him to perform the ultimate act of intimacy by the end of her 3-month vacation. And as such it was too good to use just for a kiss. Also, in all honesty, Plan S was almost too good. If she used it would belittle the experience, it would be like fishing in East Blue with high explosives. I could possibly find some way to get him in contact with Sea Stone. Oh, that was her poorest idea yet. If she got him to sit on Sea Stone he would become too weak to reflectively kiss her back, and if she wanted that she would have just kissed him in his sleep. Yuki's eyes are closed while she thinks, but then they open up wide in realization and she runs out of the room to find Robba Luffy. Yuki couldn't believe herself. How could she have forgotten something so important about Robba Luffy? Well, it wouldn't be really important to everyone, but it should have been too important to her for her to forget. It didn't take Yuki very long to find Luffy. This time, he was up on deck hanging at an angle off the lion's head with his right hand had a tight grip on the mane while his left kept his hat on his head. Robba Luffy, Yuki called out, bringing his attention from the sea. Yeah, Yuki, Robba Luffy asked, using his devil's fruit power to look at her while keeping the rest of his body in the exact same position. Could you come down for a minute? Yuki smiled at him and hoped that she didn't sound too conniving when she added, there's something really cool that I just remembered I wanted to show you. Robba Luffy hopped down from his perch almost immediately at the word cool. Really, what? I was just wondering if you remembered this. At the final word Yuki smiled as she brought her right hand up to his left side and gently moved her fingertips just below his jaw. Robba Luffy responded hazily, not able to say anything more. Yuki still couldn't believe that she forgot about this. Earlier Yuki had finally remembered why she liked to be on his left side so much. The pleasure sensors, and only the pleasure sensors, on Luffy's body were hypersensitive. And the ones on his neck, which was sensitive in most male to begin with, were even more so. She wasn't exactly sure why they were or how it happened, but she did have a theory. It all had to do with the scar. She had asked him once, of course only once after that she already knew, how he got it. Apparently he stabbed himself to try and prove something to Red Hair's crew. Now normally this wouldn't have been a big deal, however she figured that he must have damaged one of his nerves. Again, this fact alone wouldn't explain why his entire left side would be affected. However, it was this day that Robba Luffy ate his devil fruit. She figured that when the fruit changed his body it must have started with the damaged nerve and turned it into liquid rubber and spread throughout his left side. Of course this caused him to be almost paralyzed when stimulated properly. Luffy was still standing perfectly still, apparently completely lost in bliss as Yuki stroked his jawbone. He let out a groan of satisfaction as Yuki applied more pressure. Yuki, obviously, took advantage of his pleasure-induced fog to move in and finally take her first kiss from him in 3 years, 2 months, and 1 week. Again, not like she was counting or anything. Dream? There was no way this could be happening. What she was seeing just couldn't be happening. It had to be an optical illusion, or better yet a dream. Yes, that was it. She must have fallen asleep while reading her paper and this was part of a long continuing nightmare. That was it that explained everything. The last week was just a bad dream, her subconscious showing her all the things that they could do if she would just stop being such a coward and tell Luffy how she feels. And to get its point across it had come up with Yuki, the other woman who would take him away if she didn't. Yeah, she couldn't be real. Really, what kind of women would fall in love with such an idiot? Well, she did, but her relationship with Luffy was complicated. This is all one big elaborate dream. I'm sleeping on the deck and this is all a dream, where some girl called Yuki is in love with Luffy, just one big long dream. And even if the whole week hadn't been a dream, this had be. That was the only explanation for this. Nami had just come up from her little map-making office after completing her own map of Long Ring Long Land. She had fallen behind in her map-making, but if she had kept to her schedule of the week she might have actually catch up with their adventure and started drawing the map for Ennis Lobby and Water 7. Thank goodness for her memory. However, before this morning, she had not done any drawing and what she was seeing right now was exactly what she had been hoping to make sure didn't happen. They were kissing. Yuki and Luffy were kissing. The reason that this had to be a dream was that Nami had come across this scene several minutes ago and both of the people evolved had yet to disconnect. But that wasn't the most disturbing thing. What was that Luffy was clearly enjoying the activity. She could tell by the content look on his face, the matching noises that were coming out muffled, and that his hands had somehow ended up at the small of her back. No, this wasn't kissing, it was so much more passionate than that. The only phrase that she could think of to describe this would be, making out. Again, clearly this had to be a dream. Luffy wasn't allowed to act like that. This fit him worse than the dancing. He wasn't allowed to make out with someone else. Luffy was too childish, too much of an idiot, to be someone who could make out with a girl. She doubted he had ever kissed someone before. No wait, she knew that wasn't true. One of the first few things that Yuki told them was that she was his first kiss. But this had to be a dream, it just had to. Nevertheless, she had to make sure. She moved her right hand up to her arm without hesitation. It's not like, ow. Number that hurt, that means, that is real. Biting her lower lip, she could feel her eyes starting to leak. No, don't cry. Crying won't help. Acting like a heartbroken lovesick schoolgirl wouldn't do her any good. She'd have to try and see a silver lining to this. If there was one, she would find it. After all, she was Nami, she could see anything that looked remotely like treasure within a 10-kilometer radius. Okay, there was one, although it was a bit of a stretch. Now she had the information she needed to get rid of some of the fears that were holding her back. Such as if would he even be able to comprehend what she was talking about when she finally did tell him. Although it did create a whole bunch new ones. It seemed that Luffy had practiced kissing, and she didn't. So what if she wasn't any good at it? What if he didn't want that kind of relationship with her? What if the only reason he didn't let Yuki kiss him all the time was because he didn't like public displays of affection? I've been hanging around with Usopp too much. She could think more on this later. She had something more important to do now. She had to make the summer bitch remove her tongue from Luffy's mouth. Ahem. Nami cleared her throat to alert them to her presence. However, Nami soon became thoroughly annoyed when neither responded. Nami tried again, this time louder. Ahem. Again, neither of them responded. Nami had become too frustrated to try and be subtle, so she let out, "Oi." Yuki finally responded, removing her lips from Luffy's. She then replied, clearly annoyed. "Do you mind, Headeye-san?" Yuki was giving Nami one of the worst death glares yet. I'm kinda busy here. She then turned her head to try and go back to her earlier activity. However, Nami was having none of that. So right before their lips connected, Nami spoke up. I can see that, but I wasn't trying to talk to you. I need Luffy for something. This of course was a total lie. She had only come out on the deck to get some fresh air. She had spent an hour and a half making her map. Maybe I have been hanging out with Usopp too much. Well, he's busy too, so she began to wave her right hand and continued. Sho. Yuki then stopped and looked at hand for some reason and then let out a sigh. Aw damn. It had seemed that during this short time Luffy had seemed to have disappeared somewhere. Thank you, so much Hedai-san. Yuki responded, crossing her arms across her abdomen. You scared him away. She then added under her breath. It had taken me 3 years, 2 months, and 1 week to get that kiss. She then added in an even lower voice. Not that I was counting. Nami's eyebrow was twitching and she could feel a vein popping out of her forehead. She was getting really annoyed with that nickname. Not only was it a shot at her hair, it was this woman's roundabout way of insulting her intelligence. Whatever, Nami turned around deciding that she was going to look for Luffy. Maybe she could find him before she lost her resolve to tell him how she felt. However, that was not to be. She had checked very where she could think of to look for him, and even some places she doubted he would be. She had started with Crow's Nest, as it was an obvious place, but only found Chopper. It was his turn. Take watch. She had then went and checked the most obvious place to look for him, the kitchen. But all she found there was Frankie reinforcing the hinges of the fridge. Apparently Luffy had found a way around their seastone lock. She then checked several other places where she thought he might be, but he wasn't. The place that were included in that category were his room, Yuki's room, thank God, Usopp's workshop. All that was in this room was a doll that if you squinted covered your eyes and were half blind might look like Usopp, that kept screaming in pain as if it was being assaulted. That might work better as a distraction than his false bravado. The port for the soldier docking system, the bathroom, the armory. After exhausting everywhere she could actually picture him being, she began to check some of the less likely places. Her room, unfortunately he wasn't there. Everyone else's bedrooms. The infirmary, that little room that was acting as a library. However, that was the last place she could even think of looking, and she just gave up looking for him. She had checked practically everywhere on the ship. She had decided if she couldn't find him, he didn't want to be found, so she didn't have to worry about Yuki finding him again. So she resolved that she should just spend some time trying to catch up on her map making. Nami went straight to her little office. When she arrived, it was just like she left it. Not that she expected it to be any different, because Sunny was much larger, so no one ever came in here. Except for when a storm came up and they needed her to tell them what to do. Nami instantly went into her map-making manners, putting on her reading glasses and tying her hair, and tried to start a map for that island where they had first ran into Ichiko. The key word in that statement was, tried. It seemed that her hands didn't want to cooperate with that and insisted in drawing nothing but doodles and wasting her paper. Most of them consisted of her and Luffy in all sorts of romantic situations. Somewhere of Yuki dying in unimaginably, horribly, gruesome ways. But there was one that Nami herself couldn't believe. She had finally paid attention to it. She blushed so bad that even the cleavage, that her green shirt with the word golden on it showed, was actual completely red. She then let out an undignified eep, and quickly scribbled it out, not believing how perverted her subconscious has been lately. Luffy had made his shirtless appearance every night for the last 8 days, but still she'd seen Luffy without his shirt before, so the dream appearances could be explained. But Nami was quite sure she'd never seen Luffy doing that. Realizing that her hands aren't going to draw anything that's even close to resembled a map, she began to talk out loud to clear her mind. I can't believe that this is happening to me. Nami set down her pen before she added, I've never been so jealous in my life. I was slightly worried when Robin came aboard, but I didn't worry all that much. She laid her forehead down on her forearms, which she placed on her desk. She sighed before continuing, I mean, we had so much more history together, and she is much older than you. But I can't say that now. Nami sat back up in the chair and added, she knew you for 5 years before you parted ways. And she might actually be younger than you. Oh God, what if you like younger women? At this, Nami grabbed the sides of her head with both hands. Luffy, she said while taking off her glasses and began to rub the base of her temples. What is it that Yuki has that I don't? A coat? A voice spoke from the corner and Nami instantly froze up. No, you have one of those. You made me pay for 3 of them. Nami spun around, almost falling out of her chair, hoping that she might just see that her mind was playing tricks on her. Woo. However, that was not the case, because yes, there he was. Green hair? He asked. No, if you wanted that you'd just dye it? What? No, he wasn't supposed to be here. This had to be an, ow, aw damn. Oh I know. Luffy bunched his right hand into a closed fisted on his open left hand. She's an ability user. You're not supposed to be in here. Nami was panicking. How long have you been in here? She was going to be so embarrassed if he had heard any of that. She had sounded just like a whiny prepubescent. Nope. I'm not. Luffy smiled at her before continuing, in about an hour. Oh God, he did hear all that. Nami was so embarrassed right now. Just like she knew she would be, but to hide this fact she quickly yelled, If you know that, why are you in here? Hoping he would think that she was red out of anger. Because I'm not supposed to be, Luffy answered with a nod. How is that a reason? Nami yelled. She was actually angry that time. Don't be stupid, Nami. Nami had sweat dropped at this, bending over on all fours with her head practical touching the floor. Hey, this is cool, Luffy spoke after Nami had spent several minutes on the floor, but I wonder what was scribbled out. What? Nami's head shot up to see that Luffy was holding a piece of paper up to the light that was coming in from the window. Her head shot back to her desk only to see that the only thing on it was that pen she was using just a few minutes ago. What's my head doing there? Nami did the only thing she could think of to fix this living nightmare and punched the back of his head, causing his neck to stretch and his head to slam into the floorboards, half-mast. His eyes had fallen to the half-mast as he sat in the corner of Nami's map room thinking over what had happened up on deck. When Yuki's hand had made contact with his neck, it felt really nice. Yuki had asked him a question, although he forgot what it was, so he just mutters a couple of syllables that she might be able to take as an answer. A few seconds after that, she had placed her lips on his, and he was sure that if he was a normal man, and not Monkey D. Luffy, future Pirate King, that his knees would have buckled and Yuki would have had her way with him, like she had wanted to all week, actual even longer than that. But thankfully he was Monkey D. Luffy, future Pirate King, and he didn't plan on changing anytime soon or ever really. Well, except when he became the Pirate King. Then he supposed he'd no longer be the future Pirate King because then he'd already be the Pirate King. But then would he still be the Pirate King in the future? Then he'd still be the future Pirate King. This thought was starting to hurt Luffy's brain, so he focused on what had recently happened again. It had been a while since Luffy and Yuki had kissed, around 3 years or something, and he hadn't really ever kissed anyone else, so he had forgotten how nice it felt to have Yuki's sweet lips pressed against his own while her lithe body pressed against his. Sometime later, how long he had no idea, it could have been anywhere from seconds to days as far as he was concerned. He had thought he heard Nami but wasn't able to tell because of what Yuki could do when she touched his neck. It felt so nice when she did that. Maybe she always did that to people when she wanted something. She was really lucky that she could make people feel that good. Luffy supposed it was probably one of her devil fruit abilities. No, that does make sense, she could do that before she left too. Maybe it's just something she learned to do to people. But eventually the wonderful sensation had stopped, and as soon as he could move again he ran away from Yuki. Luffy wasn't quite sure why he had run away, but his instinct had told him to, and Luffy really trusted his instincts. Well, in most matters. He had thought about hiding somewhere else, but Yuki has found all of his other hiding spots. However, his thoughts had to stop when Nami came in. He just hoped she didn't beat him too bad for coming in here. But thankfully it seemed that she didn't notice his presence, so instead of drawing attention to himself by calling out to her, he just laid back against the wall and tipped Shanks' hat to cover his eyes and relaxed. He had almost fallen asleep until Nami spoke. I can't believe that this is happening to me. Nami set down her pen before she added, I've never been so jealous in my life. As she said this, Luffy sat up and tilted his head to the side, not quite sure what she was talking about. I was slightly worried when Robin came aboard, but I didn't worry all that much. Nami laid her forehead down on her forearms, which she placed on her desk. She sighed before continuing, I mean, we had so much more history together and she is much older than you. Luffy blinked at Nami. She just wasn't making any sense. He thought she was talking about money, but money isn't old, it's just there. But I can't say that now. Nami sat back up in the chair and added, she knew you for 5 years before you parted ways. And she might actually be younger than you. Oh god, what if you like younger women? At this, Nami grabbed the sides of her head with both hands. He looked back and forth across the room to try and see who, or what, she was talking to. He couldn't see a pile of money anywhere. Luffy, she said while taking off her glasses and began to rub the base of her temples. What is it that Yuki has that I don't? Oh, I guess she did notice me, a coat? He voiced his answer in the form of a question. Not sure if that's what she wanted to hear. No, you have one of those, you made me pay for 3 of them. Nami spun around, almost falling out of her chair. Woo? Green hair? He asked. No, if you wanted that you'd just dye it? Luffy puckered his lips. This question was hard, harder than the future Pirate King question. Oh, I know. Luffy bunched his right hand into a closed fisted on his open left hand, absolutely sure he had the right answer. She's an ability user. You're not supposed to be in here. Nami sounded like she was panicking. How long have you been in here? Nope. I'm not. Luffy smiled at her before continuing, in about an hour. If you know that, why are you in here? Her face was red, but she didn't sound angry really. Because I'm not supposed to be, Luffy answered with a nod. How is that a reason? Nami yelled. She actually sounded angry that time. Don't be stupid, Nami. It was so obvious, at least to him, that the best place to hide was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, although it didn't work for the kitchen because, although Sanji said he wasn't supposed to be there, he would go there all the time. Nami had sweat dropped at this, bending over on all fours with her head practical touching the floor. He never liked Nami, or any of his friends really, to be sad, so he decided that he better compliment her, to make her feel better. So he grabbed what he saw her working on without getting up. Hey, this is cool. Luffy spoke after Nami had spent several minutes on the floor, but I wonder what was scribbled out. He got up, pushed the hat to hang from his neck, and positioned the paper to try and see what was under the scribbles. What? He heard Nami speak up from her position on the floor. What's my head doing there? He could tell that it was a picture of him because of the hat, but he wasn't exactly sure who the other person was. He continued to look at the picture to try and figure out who the other person was. However, he wasn't able to continue his attempts to figure it out as his head slammed against the floorboards. Ow, ow. Luffy sat up, grabbing the knot that was forming on his head. What was that for Nami? I've told you before not to touch my maps, Nami screamed with her hand still smoking from when she punched him. That's not a map though, he pointed to the paper with all the pictures on it. His head slammed into the floor again. You didn't know that, Nami yelled at him again. That hurt, he said in a pained voice, grabbing the second bump that formed on his head. Why are you in here anyway? She asked him again. I already told you, because I'm not supposed to be, he raised his voice to her. His head met with the floor again. What was that for? He asked again. That's not a good reason to be in here. Yes it is. How could that possible be a reason? Because it is. Huh? Nami made a confused voice as her eyebrow began to twitch. Luffy's face met with the floor for the fourth time that day. Nami sighs out his name. Luffy, you're not making any sense. You're the one not making sense, he said, waving his finger at her. Oh, whatever, I give up, she said, obviously realizing he was right. What are you doing in here anyway? She asked, sitting back at her desk. Nothing really, he said, sitting cross-legged, his head injuries having gone. Just seemed like the best place to be. He stopped there, not wanting to give her any reason to ask where he was before. Why's that? Nami asked, not facing him, but her eyes kept coming to looking at him every few seconds. Huh? Luffy tilted his head to the side. And then never mind, her eyes fixing on her desk. Okay, he said with a nod, picking up the doodle paper. Hey, that happened to me before, he said, pointing to a picture of someone with long hair falling into a pit of snakes. That too, that one too, and that, and that, and that. Oh, I'm glad he didn't think of that, he said, pointing to all of the pictures with the long-haired person. Gah? Nami tried to take the paper away, but he just moved it out of her reach. He wasn't done yet, there were still pictures he hadn't looked at. Hey, that a different person, he said, looking at a picture with him and a girl. It was clearly a girl, no guy's chest, with short-ish hair, sitting on a tic-tac-toe board, with sweets in their hands, looking like they were going to put them in the other's mouth. He scratched his head looking at the paper, moving it several times so Nami couldn't take it away. Give that back, damn it, Nami screamed, getting out of her chair, trying to take it away from him. No way, he laughed, continuing his game of keep away so he could figure out what he was doing with the girl. It was then he noticed there was a basket on the board, with the two of them. He blinked a few times before screaming, it's a picnic. Of course it is, Nami said, trying yet again to take the paper away from him. What else would we be doing on a bland? She stopped reaching for it and her face became extremely red before finishing, Ket. Huh? Luffy looked at her confused, then looked back and forth between her and the girl in the picture. Hey, that's you, Nami? Luffy informed her. If possible, Nami's face became redder as she said, yeah, hiding her eyes behind her hair. Who else went to the picnic? He asked. I bet Sanji and Yuki wanted to come. What else did we bring? There was lots of meat, right?
Where are we? Is it the island of meat? He asked, not letting Nami get a word in.
When are we going to do this? Soon, right? He asked her another question. What? She responded with her mouth slightly open after. Why are we feeding each other? He asked her, but continued after recalling an earlier memory. Oh wait, it's a game, right? Yuki was always asking me to do that with her. How come girls always want to play that game, Nami? It doesn't seem that fun. LL Luffy, did why you just ask? She swallowed something. Huh, did you just? She stopped repeating her earlier action. Nami, his mind finally taking note of the red tint of her skin. You're all red, are you sick again? You should go see Chopper. At this, Nami's face turned back to its normal coloring and then she sighed, and he was uncertain if it was in disappointment or relief at the sudden change of topic before she said, No Luffy, I'm not sick. She continued in such a soft tone he wondered if he was supposed to hear what she said or not. Well, not physically anyway. Well, that's good, he said with a smile, and decided that he had hid from Yuki long enough and now it would be safe to go back up to the deck, maybe get a snack from the fridge first. However, before he got to the door, Nami grabbed hold of his arm and said, Luffy, wait. Huh, what is it? Luffy asked as he walked back to her so his arm wasn't stretched anymore. There's something I want, no need to tell you. Her voice was extremely quiet. Yeah, what? He was really close to her face, because if he wasn't he wouldn't be able to hear her, looking directly into her eyes. Her eyelids were half closed with her head tilting to the right and he could feel her breath on his lips. I'm pretty sure that she seemed to be moving closer to him. That I low. An incredibly loud, and somewhat girly, scream interrupted what she was about to say. Huh, who was that? Luffy thought out loud, turning his head away from Nami. There were only 3 girls on this ship and he was pretty sure that Scream wasn't from any of them. Nami was right next to him. Yuki's scream was completely different, and although he couldn't be sure it wasn't Robin, he didn't think so, it just didn't go with her. Somebody help me, there's a seeking, Usopp's voice screamed from his position up on deck. Luffy laughed as he realized the girl who screamed must have been Usopp, seeking monster, and he started to drag Nami with him up to see the aforementioned monster. Wait Luffy, I still have, she said, but he wasn't really listening, he was too excited about the monster. And she sighed as she realized this and picked up her pace so that he wasn't dragging her. There better be a seeking or Usopp's a dead man, she spoke trough-greeted teeth. Yeah, that wouldn't be nice, getting my hopes up like that. They finally arrived up on deck to see that yes, there was in fact a seeking trashing about in the ocean next to Sunny. Awesome, he said, looking at the giant white lizard-like creature who had a red nose that was misproportioned to its body. Nami glared at the creature, clearly mad at it, although he couldn't think of any reason why, it hadn't even attacked them yet. Well Luffy, are you just going to stand there? Go kill that thing, Nami said, facing him and pointing at the creature. Huh, he blinked at her, confused. Why, it's not doing anything. What are you saying? That thing total ruined. She stopped and her cheeks became red again before she pushed him forward, saying, never mind the reason, just go do it. He stumbled forward and fell down the stairs, falling flat on his face. Several seconds later, Luffy brought his feet forward so that he could stand upright, then walk over to the right side of the boat to get a closer look at the monster. What he saw was more than a little disappointing to him, and if he thought about it, kind of pathetic. WHWHWH, what's going on? He heard Chopper ask Nami with a shaking voice. The monster had its head out of the water, just barely floating on the surface. Luffy scratched his head. This thing wasn't even as intimidating as a fluffy bunny. Why is Usopp so scared and why is Nami so mad? Oi seeking, he called out to the monster, but the lizard didn't respond. Oi seeking, Luffy called out louder, but yet again, the lizard didn't respond. This monster was really getting on his nerves. Seeking, I said, he stretched out his arm and hit the creature with a Gumo Gumo no pistol, oi. This finally got the monster's attention. But instead of acting like a normal seeking and attacking him and Sunny, it just brought up its head to look at him and, achoo, sneezed on him, covering him in a mystery liquid. Luffy blinked a few times before screaming, oi, what was that for? That's rude. The seeking growled out what might have been a response, although he had no idea what it said. I think I'm going hurl, he heard Chopper speak next to Nami again. Oh Chopper, come on, Nami spoke to the zone. It's not that bad, it looks a little gross, but it's not that bad. She paused for a second, and beside, aren't you a doctor? Shouldn't you be used to this type of thing? Not me, Chopper screamed, and at this Luffy brought his arms back to his side. He was about to Gumo Gumo no bazooka the seeking. Huh, it's a girl, Luffy asked his short nakama. Chopper walked up to the side and growled something to the lizard, answering him with its own set, before responding to Luffy. Yeah, her name Akueki, 1. She hasn't been feeling well lately. The seeking said something again. She says she's sorry for getting you dirty, but you woke her up from a nap and she didn't see you. The monster breathed in through her nose, sounding like she was going to hake a lugia at them. Okay then, Luffy nodded and went to the front of the ship. Make her feel better, Chopper. What, why me she needs a doctor? Asked the shaking reindeer. You're the doctor, Usopp and Nami said together. Oh yeah. Nami Swan, I heard you call out in terror and I'm here to save you, Sanji said, finally arriving up on deck. Why it took him so long to get up on deck might never be known. Thanks Sanji-kun, but that wasn't me, Nami said, smirking up at Usopp. Apparently Sanji didn't hear what she said as he ran toward Akueki, ready to kill it and protect Nami. However, before he could make contact, Chopper ate a rumble ball, switched into arm point and punched Sanji in the chest before saying, don't attack her, she's sick. Yeah, that's rude, Luffy and Usopp said together, but that beast attacked and scared Nami-san, Sanji said, getting up. I already told you that wasn't me, Nami screamed. Yeah, that was clearly Usopp, Luffy nodding in agreement with Nami. Yeah, that was clearly oi, Usopp said, making a smacking motion with his hand. Oh god, Nami spoke, having come closer to the group, most like to set Sanji straight, grabbing her nose. PP, and Luffy asked in unison. However, right after that, Chopper, who had switched back to his brain point, and Usopp, who was standing next to Luffy, both shot their hands to their noses, repeating Nami's earlier words of, oh god. Luffy blinked, looking at his nakama. What? He asked again, having yet to smell anything. Oh god, that stuff sticks to high heaven, Luffy, Nami said nasally, still holding her nose. It does, he tilted his head before sniffing the then blanching his tongue. Yeah, it does. Luffy, she said to him, her hand not leaving her nose, go wash that stuff off, go take a bath or something. Luffy's eyes went wide at the suggestion. No way, Sanji spoke then, his nose also pinched with his thumb and pointer finger. You shitty captain, how dare you talk to Nami-san like that? Yeah, Luffy, you stink, go take a shower, Usopp chimed in, having a harder time holding his nose than Nami and Sanji. I don't wanna, Luffy screamed in protest. He had a reason for not wanting to take a bath, and a very good one too. Of course it wasn't something he was going to bring up with Nami in the relative vicinity. That reason being that it was not a good idea to remove his cloths with Yuki being on the ship. He had avoided needing to take a bath, so far, by taking a bucket of soapy water into his room and giving himself a sponge bath. Luffy, don't be so childish about this. Nami spoke again. You need to clean yourself off. I don't wanna, he screamed, still adamant about keeping both his clothes on and his reason to himself. You shitty rubber man, your filth is an affront to Nami-san's beautifully delicate nose. A yawn is heard from the back corner of the ship, followed by a, what's with all the noise, you blonde baka? You getting so blue-balled you have to do that up on deck now? What was that, you shitty swordsman? I asked if you were thinking about that one-legged guy while messing with your L. At this question, Sanji brought up a leg to kick Zoro upside the head. However, before the foot made contact with Zoro's head, Nami's perfect climb attack made contact with Sanji's. Now's not the time for you and Zoro. She hit said man in the stomach, to be fighting. We need to get our stubborn captain to take a bath. Hi Nami Swan, Sanji responded happily. Is that all this? Zoro stopped and sniffed the air, and responded just the same as everyone else by grabbing his nose. Gah. See Luffy, even the disgusting swordsman agrees. At this, Zoro grabbed his cursed sword to attack the breakdancing cook. However, before he could even swing it, Nami bonked him over the head, saying, now's not the time to be stupid. Fine, whatever, let's just get this over with. This has interrupted my post-workout nap. At this, Zoro grabbed Luffy's leg and started to drag him to the door below deck. However, Luffy was still determined not to remove his clothing and grabbed the side rail of Sunny and holding with most of his strength. All would have broken it and then Frankie would be mad. Not a half bad idea, Marimo, said Sanji, keeping his voice down so that Zoro wouldn't hear, grabbing Luffy's other leg and began pulling with the swordsman. When the two members arrived at the bathroom, Luffy still hadn't let go of the railing. Great idea, Marimo, rolling his eyes, or is it I? At the green-haired man. Now what? How am I supposed to know? He bellowed at the ship's cook. What's this, cook-san? Swordsman-san? Robin asked, coming out of their little book room. Oh, Robin Schwan, it is. Sanji's grip loosened slightly. Don't even think about letting go, Arrow Cook, Zoro bellowed. Nay, would you mind explaining what is going on, Swordsman-san? Not sure really. Zoro started tugging on Luffy's leg some more. Luffy stinks for some reason and is refusing to bathe. That seems weird, Robin said thoughtfully. Yeah, but I don't care, all his whining interrupted my nap, Zoro responded. Well, let me help, I have an idea, she said with an almost evil grin. Up at Luffy's front, Nami and Usopp were trying to get him to let go of the railing, as Chopper was figuring out what was wrong with Akueki, although they weren't having much luck with one arm each. Oh come on Luffy, just go take a bath, you stick, Nami spoke, tugging on his left arm. I don't wanna, he bellowed again. What's the big deal, Luffy? Usopp asked. You never had a problem before. That was before. Well, what's different now? Usopp questioned. Damn, and nothing, Luffy answered quietly as his right foot was getting tugged a little more. Aha, so there is something different. Crap, Luffy cursed because he might have given something away. Come on Luffy, you can tell me, Usopp spoke, and Luffy felt his sandals being pulled off. No, Usopp, ah ha ha ha, Luffy burst out laughing. Luffy could no longer keep his hold on the railing and went shooting back to his feet, holding his side, laughing the entire time. It seemed Robin's plan, which was to tickle the soles of his feet until he had let go, had worked perfectly as Luffy came bouncing over them. Wow, Captain San. Robin spoke with her nose covered. Swordsman San wasn't kidding, you do smell terrible. You shitty idiot, now you've assaulted Robin Chan's sense of smell, get in there, and pushed him into the bathroom before adding from the other side of the door, and I'm going to stay guard to make sure you take it. At this, Luffy smiled. With Sanji guarding the door, there might be a chance that he could get all the way through a shower. So he got a bucket, filled it with water, and put his shorts and vest into it to soak out the mystery liquid, setting his hat next to it, and then jumped into the shower. 30 minutes later, having to take an extra long shower to get all of the sticky stuff off of his skin, he got out of the shower and blinked a few times. He couldn't quite place it, but he was pretty sure that something was different with the room, but couldn't place it right away. It wasn't until he went to get his hat did he figure what was wrong, that being that there were no towels in the room. Oh, I guess they were all dirty, he said, rubbing his wet hair. I guess I'll have to wear what I was. And the bucket containing his cloths was no longer in the room. Oh, a mystery bucket, he said, smiling, holding his hat in front of him, hiding his male anatomy and sneaking out of the room, taking minor note that Sanji wasn't there, to head toward his room. When he got there, making it without running into any of his nakama or Yuki, he immediately noticed that the only thing in the room was his hammock. Gee, where is all the launder? He finally recalled why he was avoiding that shower and screamed, Yuki. He rushed out his door, keeping a firm hand on his hat, and began his rapid search of Sunny for the said women, finally finding her up on deck. Yuki, he screamed again. "Hi Robba Luffy, what can I do for you?" Yuki responded, licking her lips as she looked at him. "Where are they?" he asked, getting straight to the point, and she smiled knowingly at him. "Now Robba Luffy, I have no idea what you're talking about," the smile never leaving her face. "Where are my clothes?" His voice as loud as it could be, causing everyone of his nakama to look at him. "What would you need clothes for? Weren't you going to ask me for something?" she said, unbuttoning the top 3 buttons of her red dress shirt, revealing that she had no bra. "Where are they?" Luffy hollered again, trying to ignore that fact. "Robba Luffy." She brought her hand up to her chest, spreading her shirt open more. "Are you suggesting that I have something to do with your stolen clothing?" "Of course he is, and I don't recall him saying anything about them being stolen," Nami said, glaring at Yuki. "Why would you think I had anything to do with?" Yuki asked Luffy, completely ignoring Nami's statement. "It's not like I've done anything like that before." "Yes you have," he yelled, remembering something that conflicted with what she said. "Really?" she said, looking genuinely surprised, probably because she forgot about it. "When was that?" "The first time Hermana, too, visited," Luffy said, moving to the old her. "I wanted something salty and you put my hand on her chest." 3. "Ah now Robba Lu," Yuki started but was stopped when Nami pushed her. "God, I can't believe you," she pushed Yuki again. "I knew you were slutty, but God." "Hey, don't push me, Hedai-san," Yuki pushed Nami back. "Same to you, bitch." Nami pushed her again. "Skank," Yuki shoved Nami hard. "Whore," Nami pushed back with more force. "Hussy," Yuki pushed back. "Psycho," Nami retaliated. "Busu," "Fore," Yuki striked back. At this, Nami grabbed Yuki and threw her over her shoulder in an attempt to toss her into the ocean. However, she just hit Luffy, knocking him over the edge. However, both Nami and Yuki didn't notice this and went back to fighting. As Luffy was pushed over the edge, he used his right hand to grab the railing, accidentally letting go of his hat. Luffy's brain went on automatic and his left flew out and placed it back on his head, just as he has thousands of times before. He hanged there for a few seconds, to calm down from almost losing Shanks' hat, before he pulled himself up and over the edge. "Hup," Luffy said as he made contact with the deck. He then looked over the side and said, "Woo, that was close, I almost lost my hat." At the word hat, Nami and Yuki, who had been rolling around on deck fighting just like the animals that gave their activity its name, stopped, with Nami on top and Yuki on bottom, and looked at Luffy with their mouths open before they said in unison, "Yum." A few seconds later, Nami's face became completely red and blood erupted from her nose. "Ah Nami, I knew you were sick," Luffy screamed out. "Chopper, Chopper. Do something, there is something wrong with Nami." He called out to him. He was over on the other side of Sunny in his heavy point, giving medicine to a Kueki. "It's not her, Captain-san," Robin said with a chuckle. "Huh?" he responded, confused. "Robba Luffy?" Yuki asked, getting up. She sniffed up something into her nose. "Did somebody die?" "Wah?" he asked, still confused. "You're at half-mast," Yuki said, pointing at a lower part of his body, practically drooling. At her words, he took off his hat to cover up the thing she was pointing at. "Ah, don't cover it up," Yuki said, disappointed, before she closed her eyes and added, "We could do this, and that, and maybe I could bring out the prism and we could." Yuki was stopped there by blood erupting from her nose. "Oh no, Chopper, hurry up, it's spreading," yelling to the reindeer arrival. Yuki awoke with a moist cloth on her head, not quite sure how and when she arrived in the infirmary. The last thing she remembered clearly was that Hedai-san had scared off Robba Luffy after interrupting their kiss. And she knew, or at least had the feeling, that something important happened. Well, she wasn't sure, so instead of getting up, she just lay there and thought over what happened after Hedai-san scared away Luffy. She remembered she had searched over an hour for Robba Luffy after he had run off. She had even been checking inside some of the high-tech mini-vehicles looking for him. Then she heard someone scream, "Aie." It could have been anyone, but she had a feeling that it had been Sogeking for 2 reasons. 1, because it should have been his turn on watch, something she knew because Reindeer Sama and him had traded off about 20 minutes ago. 2, she remembered his screams well from when she'd beat him up. It was confirmed it was indeed Sogeking when he screamed, "Somebody help me, there's a Sea King." After this, she slowly worked her way up to the deck, walking slowly to recheck every place she may have missed, and besides, there was no point hurrying. Knowing Sogeking's general attitude to life, it was probably just an oversized eel. It was on her way that she came across the Barando standing in the hall looking at a door. "What's the matter, Barando, have you forgotten how to open the door? You just grab the handle, turn it clockwise and push," she explained to him, not sure if he even understood what clockwise meant. "Ah Yuki-san, thank you so much for explaining that to this love-sick fool." The Barando spoke in that annoying manner with a heart in his eye. She wondered what he was hiding behind his hair before he added, "But no, I'm just making sure that my shitty captain is taking his shower." "You mean Robba Luffy's taking a shower?" Yuki asked, hearing the running water now. It was at this point Yuki had to come to a morally subjective, well, to most people, decision. Whether or not to go in there and steal Robba Luffy's removed clothing. And like most times she was uncertain about something that involved ethics, two chibi clones of herself popped up on her shoulders, one dressed as a devil and the other as an angel. Yes, do it. Devil Yuki spoke first. Go in there and take those clothes so we can get a good view. No, don't do it. Angel Yuki responded. Get rid of the barando first. Both Yuki and Devil Yuki gasped at what she had suggested before she continued. And also take the towels, then go to his room and steal all of that clothing too. Angel Yuki looked at the expressions on their faces and blinked at them. What? Aren't you supposed to be telling me not to do these things? Yuki answered. Yeah, it's my job to corrupt her thoughts, the Devil Yuki said. I don't care. Robba Luffy's involved, spoke the angel figment. Oh right, Yuki and the chibi devil nodded at this. After this, which only took 2 seconds for her mind to process, she decided to follow the angel's plan and thought up the best way to get this barando out of the way. Hey barando, Yuki called to get his attention on her face, not her body. I just ran across Nico-sama. She said that her and Hetty-san were going to do something to get rid of their tan lines. And just as she expected him to, he opened his mouth a little, dropping his cigarette, then ran up to the deck saying, I'm coming ladies. Working quickly, in case he came back after learning she lied, she went straight into the room and grabbed all the towels and the bucket that contained his clothing, not wanting to mess with them, putting them into her coat. After all, Robba Luffy put them in a bucket for a reason and she didn't want to mess with that. She left his straw hat, it was his treasure and he would get mad at her for taking it. After that she went quickly to his room, gathered up everything in it into his dresser, which she put into her jacket and then headed up on deck, where everyone seemed to have gathered for one reason or another. It was then that she noticed that Reindeer-sama, in his full human form, which she called Heavy Point, was at the side of the ship mixing something that she could only assume was medicine for the large, and clearly sick, lizard-type seeking. Hey Reindeer-sama, what you doing? She asked just to pass the time until Robba Luffy came looking for his clothing. Nothing, just making some medicine for a Kueki here. She has had a head cold lately and if it continued for much longer she might have actually died of malnourishment. That would be horrible, and not cosmically fair, she said, making conversation. Huh? The zone questioned. Why is that? Well, just look at her mouth, she said, pointing to said body part. Its teeth are that of an omnivore's, but its canines show lack of use, meaning it's a vegetarian seeking. How? Why would that be cosmically unfair? Well, think about it. Most seekings that are killed are done so because they attack people so they can eat them, Yuki said, really getting into her conversation. Being a jack of all trades. Or is it Jane? She even thought about bringing out a board she could draw on to explain it better, but changed her mind, not wanting to be distracted when Robba Luffy came. And this one dies because it caught a cold even though it chooses not to eat meat. Oh, Reindeer-sama started but was interrupted when Robba Luffy yelled from below deck. Yuki. After that she got into another fight with Hetty-san, which Hetty-san started, and then her plan had come together far better than she had hoped. The plan was to get a nice view of his well-muscled abs and chest, or his shapely backside. But instead she got a view of her primary desire, which was ready for. She stared, fanning herself there. Any more thoughts like that and I'll start doing something inappropriate for a T rating. 1. Yuki blinked a few times. Where had that thought come from? But that was beside the point. Now that she has seen Luffy full frontal, she would have to get a jump start on getting Robba Luffy into bed. She had been figuring she'd wait until after they arrived, but with the current situation it demanded that she begin. I can't wait another day. I'll start Operation CP after dinner. They had taken back Robba Luffy's clothes when she was unconscious, however you wouldn't have been able to tell by how Yuki and Hetty-san were acting. Neither of them could take their eyes off his pants. Hetty-san's face seemed to have drawn a permanent blush, and most shocking of all was that they were so focused on him that they didn't even care that the other was looking too. After dinner Yuki was lying in Robba Luffy's hammock with the first step of Operation CP ready, waiting for Robba Luffy to come back to his room. Just when she was certain she would go insane from boredom, Robba Luffy's door started to jiggle and then opened, revealing Yuki to Robba Luffy, and his jaw hit the floor, literally. Yuki was not wearing her normal set clothing. No, she was wearing a red bustier that had a green ball of fuzz, which matched her hair color perfectly, that was sewn on just behind her tailbone. She also had donned on a pair of fake bunny ears. Well, Robba Luffy, are you just going to stand there? Your snow bunny wishes to do what rabbits do best, Yuki said, standing up and rubbing her hands up her sides, then up her neck before fluffing her hair. As she did this, Robba Luffy just stared at her body, and Yuki couldn't have been happier about that, unless of course he agreed to the request. However, several seconds later Robba Luffy lifted up his jaw, let go of the door and ran like a bat out of hell. But Yuki had planned for him to do this and had been set up for it. Yuki has always been faster than Robba Luffy. Well before she left, making sure he wouldn't ever be able to outrun her. And now that she had her high powers, he never, or most likely never, would be able to. Really, it is impossible to outrun light, but Robba Luffy might find a way. Robba Luffy ran to several of his hiding places, however Yuki had always a different outfit and thus Operation Cosplay had commenced. In Sogeking's workshop she met him in a lab coat, her hair tied back, with reading glasses on, and said, Are you ready to experiment, Robba Luffy? He ran to the solder docking port. She was there in overalls that showed her cleavage. She didn't pack any bras for this trip. No need for them, and said, do you want me to handle your tool? Luffy sprinted out yet again and attempted sanctuary in the library. She met him in a business skirt and the same reading glasses as before, lying on a table, saying when he got there, we can have as much fun as you want, Robba Luffy, but we'll have to be quiet, after all this is a library. Luffy was gone before she'd finished speaking and hid in the infirmary, barricading the door as soon as he was inside. Yuki was already there, this time loosely covered in bandages, and only in bandages. Robba Luffy, do wish to play, doctor? He ran to the deck, leaving the infirmary with a Robba Luffy-shaped hole in the wall. She was there in a, tighter than it should have been, marine private uniform, and she saluted him as she said, do you wish to dock in my port, Captain Straw Hat Luffy? He ran to the kitchen. She was there too in a chef's uniform and asked, would you like to eat some cherry pie, Robba Luffy? He was running out of places to hide and ran to a bathroom. However, she met him there too. This time clad in only a towel, which barely covered her private areas. I'll wash your back if you wash my front, Robba Luffy. She could tell he was getting desperate because he tried to hide in Hedai-san's room, however she stopped him. Yuki grabbed him by his shoulders and pulled him to the floor. She was clad in leather and she straddled his hips with one leg on either side of his waist. Yuki leaned forward and placed a sea stone, which she was holding with tongs, on his chest. Robba Luffy, you were about to go to someone else's room. You must be punished. She had moved in to kiss him again. However, before their lips connected, she was pulled off of Robba Luffy and flung backwards. Geez, I should have known, spoke Hedai-san in a sleepy voice. Do you have to be a slut so late at night? Some people are trying to sleep. At this, Hedai-san paused to yawn before continuing. We'll be arriving at meat tomorrow, and I would prefer it to be well rested, because if there really is meat growing off the trees, Luffy's going to be bouncing to the walls more than usual, so we all need as much energy as possible to be able to keep up with him. Oh my god, you're right, Yuki yelled, surprised. She didn't take that into consideration in her planning, too distracted by her attempts for short-term pleasure that she didn't think about what would happen after the reached meat. At this, Yuki used her tongs to put the sea stone back into a case, which is what allowed her coat to contain it, and before Hedai-san could do anything, she fiercely kissed Robba Luffy before the effects completely wore off and said, I'm sorry, Robba Luffy, but we'll have to pick this up later. She caressed his scarred cheek. Rain check? Yuki then quickly moved out of the way of Hedai-san's fist and made her way to her temporary room. The next morning, everyone met up on deck with the island of Meat in the horizon. The reason that they had made it there so quickly is that a Kueki had pulled them that night, as a thank you to Reindeer-sama for curing her head cold. When she said that Reindeer-sama called her a bitch, I still think he has Tourette's, so they didn't have to weigh anchor that night. Hedai-san had taken this time to call everyone's attention to her. Alright everyone, listen up, she called out, considering who our captain is. I have a feeling we will be coming back to this island at some point, and everyone, even Yuki, nodded at this. Which means I don't want any problems here, she continued, and I mean no problems. I mean no lying and starting rumors, she pointed at Sogeking. No insulting people because you can't take a compliment, she pointed to Reindeer-sama. And I mean absolutely no fighting, she glared at Robba Luffy, Zoro-sama, the Barando, and Cutty Flam. I hate to say it, but I agree with Hedai-san, Yuki said.
At this, Robba Luffy's crew all went wide-eyed and in unison screamed, Nani.
They all looked incredibly surprised. Not that Yuki could blame them, the only thing that her and Hedai-san seemed to agree on were their choices for desserts and men. On Meat Island, a high-protein diet is very common, which means people there are usually prone to violence, which means if a fight starts you're liable to start a riot. Yuki then laughed at an inside joke before continuing. And if that happens, the Barando is sure to die. And she saw Zoro-sama smirk as she said this. You mean you think there are people stronger than Sanji? Reindeer-sama asked, quaking. Well, maybe, there are quite a few strong people, she said now that she thought about it. But the reason he's sure to die is that quite a few of those strong people are women. And I know one that would try to break his neck for refusing to fight a woman seriously, even if her fiancé doesn't, too. That was the end of the group conversation, and they all went to their own areas until they began to dock. Excuse me, a main with short red hair, a purple GI, 3, white hakama, 4, a sword on his left side, and a cross-shaped scar on his left cheek. 5, called out, bring everyone to the side of the ship. But Sesha. 6, must ask you to dock elsewhere. He grabbed hold of his sword. Pirates are not. Yuki interrupted this man by saying, Himura-kun. 7. Oro. Himura-kun blinked at her. Oh my god, it is you. Yuki grabbed the side of her head. What did you do to your hair? Oro. Yuki don't know. 8. He blinked some more. What are you doing on a pirate ship? Himura-kun, she said, mildly offended, did you forget? I said that the next time I came here I would be bringing Robba Luffy. She rifled off her jacket. I have the permission of the mayor for the pirate ship to dock here. Oro, he said again. If that is the case, it is Sesha's honor to welcome you for your arrival back, that it is. Assumptions. When they had first arrived, Nami was sure that this man was incredibly dangerous and was about to kill them. However, when Oro left his lips, she got rid of that assumption. Oro, he said again, if that is the case, it is Sesha's honor to welcome you for your arrival back, that it is. Thanks, but seriously Himura-kun, what did you do to your hair? Yuki asked the short-haired man again. Oh, that, the man said, looking over his shoulder to grab at hair that was no longer there. Koru Dono thought it would be a good idea if I got it cut. Why? You look good with long hair. Koru-sama said so herself, Yuki whined. Koru Dono thought it would be safer. Kenji-kun has this habit of pulling on Sesha's hair. The man smiled with a laugh at that. Kenji? Is that a new student of Kaoru-sama's? Yuki said, confused, before adding with a smirk. Or did you two finally? At this she rubbed her hands back and forth, and pop out a kid. At this the man blushed slightly. Well, yes, Sesha supposes. But Koru Dono is Sesha's wife, that she is. Hey, that's great, she smiled at the man before adding with a pout, but how come I wasn't invited to the wedding?
Hey Yuki, Luffy spoke up, interrupted their private conversation. Who is the Oro-asan? Oh, I'm sorry, said Yuki, and I'm sorry to you too, Himura-kun. It was rude to not introduce you before engaging you in conversation. That is quite all right, Yuki Dono. That it is, the man said. Sesha does not need a formal introduction. That may be the case, Himura-kun, but you're going to get one anyway. Yuki began. This man is Himura Kenshin, acting consort for the island of Meat to the world government. Yuki Dono, this isn't. Kenshin began but was interrupted when Yuki continued talking over him. He used to be a cipher pull agent for CP7 about 18 years ago. Yuki Dono, this really isn't. Kenshin tried again to stop her. Yes, it is, Himura-kun, and you're going to get an intro whether you like it or not, so such it's rude to interrupt. At this Kenshin hung his head low, waiting for Yuki to finish. As I was saying, he was a CP7 agent about 18 years ago. After working for 5 years he left and began to wander the Grand Line until he wound up meeting Koaru-sama and steeled down here, taking the consort position after an incident that led to the apparent death of Koaru-sama, who he apparently married soon after. Oh god, so romantic. Frankie broke out crying again, but he soon noticed that everyone was being very quiet as they stared at him. Shut it, I ain't crying. Geez, Cutty Flam, no one said you were, Yuki said, rolling her eyes. And what, are you bipolar?
How do you know this? You probably weren't even born yet, Nami questioned, but after a few seconds later the last bit reached Nami's brain and said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. What was he, 7? He can't be a day older than 25. Actual Sesha is 32, Kenshin said casually. Nani? Spoke several of the Straw Hat before Nami turned to Robin and asked, have you ever heard of this man before, Robin? Not really, Navigator-san, Robin said, and then rested her hand under the side of her face before saying, but the story does sound familiar. Well, of course you don't know him, Nico-sama. In order for him to be able to live a life after his service, the Marines came up with an alias for him. Yuki spoke again. When he was in public and on missions he was referred to as Haitakuri, too, Batose. Ah, that man, Robin said thoughtfully. I'm bored, Luffy said loudly, most likely to get the conversation to end so he could leave on an adventure. Just a minute, Robba Luffy, I need to do one more thing before we go, spoke Yuki. At this Yuki sat down on her knees and pulled 3 large wooden chests from her poke jacket. Alright Barando, these 2 are for you, since, by some miracle, you are the ship's cook, Yuki explained, putting her hands on 2 of the cases. This one on my left is for replacing the supplies we used up on the trip here and to get you some extra supplies for the trip back, and the one on my right is for you to get some of the trees for keeping your meat supplies up to snuff. It should be more than enough. Yuki then brought everyone attention to the third and final, and this one is to be split up among the entire crew for their own uses. I brought all of you along so I could enjoy a nice vacation with my Robba Luffy, and this is my way of saying thanks. After finishing, Yuki opened all 3 cases nearly simultaneously. As the cases opened, Nami's eyes lit with golden belly signs with a glow that put the light from Yuki activating her powers to shame. Look at all that money. Maybe Yuki isn't so. Nami shook her head fiercely to get rid of that thought. Don't get distracted. If you get distracted she'll end up getting what you want. That's exactly what happened yesterday, twice. Alright Robba Luffy, we can go have an adventure now, Yuki said, grabbing Luffy's arm in an attempt to take him with her. But Nami wouldn't be having that today or anytime until after Yuki left, if then. Oh no you don't. Nami grabbed Luffy by the back of his vest and dragged him away from Yuki. I can't trust Luffy on this island, she said when Luffy was next to her. And I sure as hell can't trust you with him. After Nami finished saying this, Yuki smirked as if to say, damn right. Nami continued her speech. So she poked Luffy in his rubber chest. Not going anywhere without me. She poked him again to get her point across. You got that? And he nodded his head up and down quickly. After saying this, Nami went to the task of splitting the third case up among the crew. Giving 30% to herself and Robin, and giving 8% to each of the men except Sanji-kun. As Yuki said, he had more than enough. After this they all left Sunny, no one needing to stay behind because before they left Kenshin informed them that it was his responsibility to look after this harbor to make sure no problems occurred. Although that almost never happened because pirates usually came from the other direction and docked on the other side of the island. This is where Nami's Green Eyes Adventures on the Island of Meat, although I'm open to suggestions for names, starts. The first chapter being about either Chopper or Zoro. I'd like to have people vote here on this. And I will give 2 choices at the end of each chapter to decide who goes next. Nami was walking with her captain and the interloper down the street of this small village called Shokanike, 2. There were 3 villages on this island. The one on the northern side was the one they were in, there was one in the center of the island called Tataki, 3. And the village on the southern side of the island, which was a sort of pirate haven, named Funiku, 4. And Luffy seemed to jump from side of the street to side of the street looking at every stand that sold meat. Which was just about every stand. Luffy was gradually becoming more hyper from exposure. Steak. There don't seem to be any clothing stores around here. Nami thought out loud, walking faster to keep pace with Luffy. Chicken. That's because they're on the other side of town. And there are mainly kimono stands here. Not exactly your style. The more modern stuff is in Tataki and Funiku. Yuki matched Nami's speed before saying, "You can go over there if you want." "Wow, ribs. And leave you alone with Luffy?" Nami asked, picking up speed. "Roast, yeah right. Nami, fish. It was worth a shot," she said, starting to jog. Smoked, Nami started jogging as well. Grilled. Yuki jogged a little faster. Fried, Nami tried to go faster as well. Roasted, Yuki speed up some more. Baked, Nami sped up once more. Broiled, Yuki mashed Nami again. Steamed, at this point the both broke out into dead runs, but Luffy seemed to keep a strong lead on both of them. Meat, 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 meat. Meat, 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 meat. Meat, 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 meat. At this Luffy seemed to run out of steam and collapse in the middle of the street, falling backwards. Miyuk with his eyes swirling. "Wow," Nami and Yuki said together, panting, finally reaching him. Apparently, there is such a thing as too much meat for Luffy. Nami spoke in awe, bending down to look at him more closely. Yuki did the same thing and then said, "I don't think so, Hedai-san. This is more like sensory overload." "You think?" Nami asked, a little concerned about his sudden collapse. "Most definitely, just give," Yuki started saying, finally catching her breath, but she was interrupted. "Yuki-san, is that you?" said a woman wearing a black dress with a white apron, with the word Akabiko written in kanji in the bottom right-hand corner, and white gloves. "Oh my god, it is you. Koru-chan. We'll be so happy to see you. You haven't been back in almost a year and a half." The women began dragging Yuki away. "T-sama, please, I'm a little busy," Yuki pleaded with the woman, but it looked like she wasn't listening. "You will never believe this, but Koru-chan and Kenshin-san finally got together. It was really good for business. The Akabiko catered the reception." "T-sama," she pleaded again. It also put an end to some of the rumors about them. "T-sama, you know, like the one where they like to." It was at this point that they rounded a corner. It was at this point that it finally occurred to Nami that that T-person had just got her some alone time with Luffy. She'd have to thank her somehow. It also occurred to Nami that if this was a cheesy romance novel, or something close to it, either she would have bent down to kiss him or he would sit up and kiss her, but she would never assume that it would happen in real life. So it was an amazing surprise to Nami when her body started moving to do just that. However, before their lips touched, Luffy sat up and smashed their heads together before he plummeted back down to the ground, grabbing his forehead. "TTTT, that hurt," stuttered out Luffy before blinking up at Nami before asking, "What was your face doing so close to mine, Nami?" Nami was incredibly embarrassed, even without all the people who were staring, at what was just happening. And nothing, I was just making sure you didn't hurt yourself when you fell." Even as she was saying it, sounded far more unbelievable than any lie Usopp ever told. Well, almost. The one where he landed on Goldfish Scat is pretty bad. Although, by some miracle, Luffy actually believed her and said, sitting up again, "Oh okay." "Hey Nami," Luffy spoke again. "Where's Yuki?" Nami stalled, trying to think of a lie, but realized she didn't have to and said, "She just left with a friend or something." "Oh alright." Luffy picked himself, then helped her up off the ground. "So it's just Yumi, huh?" he said, dusting himself off. "I suppose so," Nami said, smiling. Luffy hummed, bringing his hand up to his chin to look like he was thinking. Then he smiled that incredibly wide, and maybe even trademarked, smile of his. "Yosha, let's go find the place for that picnic." After saying this, he grabbed her arm and started dragging her toward the closest forest area. What he had said confused Nami slightly. She didn't think he even remembered that incident. He didn't bring it up at all yesterday. Not that she would have noticed if he had. She could barely look him in the face, her eyes just kept going down. But at least he isn't bringing up the incident. I still can't believe I said that. Nami and Luffy had spent several hours in the woods looking for a place to have the said picnic. They had found several locations for it that were nearly perfect for a picnic, as in they were incredibly romantic, with a remarkable view, and relatively secluded, giving them plenty of privacy, in case they needed it. However, as it was said, they were only ever nearly perfect, and just as she would get up the nerve to even consider telling him her feelings, it would seem that Nami would find the problem with the area. For instance, in an open field that was filled with flowers, she discovered a large bush filled with spiders, then ran off. Near a waterfall she found Kava with huge black bear and ran off, again. On a shallow hill she, having decided to just kiss him and let him figure out what he meant to her, she slipped on the newly formed dew and slid down to the valley below. When Luffy reached the bottom, rolling down in a similar fashion as her, believing it would be more fun that way, she suggested that they head back to the ship because it was getting late, and she had embarrassed herself enough for one day. On the walk back to Shokunike, Nami couldn't help but steal glances at her captain and think, "This day would have been so much better if you had just kissed me, you rubber idiot." And on this particular occasion Luffy caught her staring and said, "Huh, wait, what's with that look, Nami?" At this Nami broke eye contact, looked the other direction, to hide her blush, and said, "What look?" "The one you just had," he explained, rubbing his chin with his right hand and a pout. It looked really familiar. Nami's blush intensified. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know I've seen it before." His hand still on his chin for several seconds before he removed the hand from his chin as if a light bulb went off, and he slammed his fist onto his open left palm. "That's where I've seen it before." "What are you EHP? Nami started, turn around to look at him, but was interrupted as Luffy's lips met hers. There was nothing all that special about the kiss, just a simple pressing of lips together. The kind of kiss she would have had as a preteen if Arlong hadn't come along, but it seemed much sweeter, most likely because it was with Luffy. "There you go," he said after pulling away, much to her disappointment, and began walking again. After walking for several seconds, Luffy stopped, realizing that Nami was not walking next to him anymore, and turned around to see that she had not moved since he kissed her. Even her arms had been in the same position. "Oi, Nami, what's wrong?" he asked, looking back at her, blinking before adding, "Oh, I know." At this he walked back to her, slipping his hat around her neck before he touched her cheek with his right hand and said, "I did that wrong, didn't I? Sorry," bringing her face to his again, only this it seemed more like the one she saw yesterday. After what Nami assumed was several minutes, it could have been decades for all she cared, Luffy was sent flying to the ground by a kick to his head. "You shitty Gumo," said the owner on the foot, reviled to be Sanji-kun. "I leave Nami-san in your care for a couple of hours and you try to take advantage of her." He kicked Luffy into the bushes. Looking as if he was on fire, he said, "I should kill you. You rubber idiot." The last part of the yell was squeaked in a high soprano and the flames slowly died down. The cause for Sanji-kun was that a green boot had connected to his pelvis from behind. "What have I told you, Burondo, Yuki?" That had a completely green tint to her looks, yelled, removing her foot from Sanji-kun to let him fall flat on his face as he began holding the injured area. "Don't even think about attacking Raba Luffy while I'm around." After yelling this, she took several deep breaths to calm herself before she said, "Why'd you attack him anyway?" "Shitty bastard, road, Nami-san. Kissing?" He spoke incoherently, still in the high soprano. "Oh my god," the green Yuki said, apparently able to comprehend what he just said. Her response to that was to kick him in, what Nami assumed was a still hurting area, as she screamed, "Will, why didn't you kick him sooner then, Burondo?"